Good afternoon. Welcome to ATARC's 2021 Artificial Intelligence and Data Analytics Virtual Summit. For those who do not know me, my name is Kirsten Patton, and I am one of the working group managers here at ATARC. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. We are a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I want to thank our partners today over at Snowflake, Enterprise DB, Denodo, Pure Storage, Micro Focus Government Solutions, and Alteryx. They've all been truly great partners of us at ATARC. I would also like to thank our amazing panelists and moderators for today. And additionally, I would like to thank you all for joining us. Today will be a full day of action-packed panels all surrounding AI and data analytics in the federal space. We hope you enjoy this great and informative session. Up first, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Justin Marsico. Justin is the Deputy Assistant Commissioner and Chief Data Officer in the Office of Data Transparency over at the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, which is the United States Department of the Treasury. Justin, please go ahead and take it away.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate it. And hello to all of you. As Kirsten said, I'm Justin Marsico. I'm the Chief Data Officer for the Bureau of the Fiscal Service at the Treasury Department. And just a quick word about who the Fiscal Service is if you're not familiar with us. So we help to manage the finances of the federal government. We help to disperse payments on behalf of federal agencies. We collect revenue that's due to the federal government. We help to auction off securities for debt financing. And also we keep track of the spending that federal agencies engage in when they're appropriated funds. So as you can imagine, we are a very data-rich organization, and part of my role as the Chief Data Officer is to help lead us forward to becoming a more data-driven organization. And I want to talk to you today about a couple of things that I've been learning from doing data analytics work in this fully remote environment for the last 10 or so months. But before I get there, I just wanted to acknowledge that, like many of you, our office has been largely remote for the last 10 or so months. We have a couple of functions where people have to be on site, most notably the printing of those beautiful Treasury branded paper checks that many of you or your family members of our friends have received. There have been 2 large tranches of those that have come out over the last year. But with that and a couple other exceptions, we're all remote like everybody else. We've been facing some of the same challenges as everyone, like keeping our workforce engaged and keeping employee morale up, trying to understand what's going on our teams and how to collaborate successfully. And while we've been facing those challenges, we've also been leaping forward in our digital transformation in some of the same ways that other federal agencies and companies around the world have been doing. We started with upgrading our network capacity and then moved to using collaboration tools across the organization like Slack and Teams. And we've changed our culture to be accepting of video being the default in meetings. So there have been a lot of changes that we've seen in our digital transformation journey. And while all that's been going on, my team has been continuing to lead data analytics work for our organization. And since it's been 10 months, I've stopped to reflect on what we've learned over those 10 months. And I wanted to share a couple of things with you today. And so to keep it short and simple, I will just share 2 things that I've learned and have been thinking about. The first thing is that transparency in decision-making is key during times of uncertainty and crisis. Now, I know that doesn't sound like something that you would ordinarily hear a data leader or a chief data officer saying, but I will get there in a second if you just hang with me. So if you think back to what things were like in February, March, April of 2020, offices were largely becoming remote, and staff were starting to wonder at what point they would need to come back into the office. And this is a question that many managers across the country in the public and private sector were all facing, and employees were all feeling a sense of anxiety about having to come back into the office. So this is a big problem for management to think about and solve. And in the fiscal service, we decided to take a data-driven approach to answering this question. And I don't think that we were unusual in doing that, but I'm going to tell you about what our data-driven approach was, just so you have a sense of what I'm talking about here. So we have offices in a number of locations across the country, and we said, we're going to use data on COVID cases in those different regions to decide when it's safe for employees to be back in the office. So my team helped to pull publicly available data from Johns Hopkins and the COVID tracking project, and to pull it all into a dashboard where we could get a sense of how different regions where we had offices across the country were faring with the virus. And just to see if it can work, I'm just going to quickly share what that dashboard looks like. I don't know, I'm hoping that someone can actually see my screen here, but this is the work product that we put together right here. So you can see it is every morning, this dashboard pulls in data, again, from a couple of publicly available sources that we're able to find on GitHub, and translates them into data that can be used for decision-making. So where I think our office was a little bit different is, in addition to embracing this data-driven decision-making approach, we went a step further. This is led by our commissioner, who said, we should take all of this information and make it available to our employees. So the same dashboard that the executives use to decide whether it's safe for employees to go back into the office or not is also available to our staff. So they can look at it too and understand how conditions are evolving in their different regions from the lens of going back into the office. And in the end, we found that this exercise of pushing transparency really helped to build trust among the staff, because they saw how we were making decisions and understood the criteria that we're using. You can see there are some detailed criteria here. I think we're looking at the DC area, and you can see the cases are trending up. So one of our metrics pops up as not met. So staff understood how we were making decisions, and that we were putting ourselves out there and the criteria that we were using out there so that we could be accountable to the staff for actually making those decisions. So anyway, to come back to the point that I was mentioning before about transparency and decision-making being key during times of uncertainty, one of the things that is very common for people to argue for from a data leadership position is, we need to be data-driven. We need to make decisions based on data. And my point here is that when those decisions have an impact on our workforce, there's also an opportunity here for us to build trust by not only making data-driven decisions, but really disclosing the terms upon which data-driven decisions are being made. So that's the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about, and see if I can successfully stop sharing. Okay, thank you. The second thing I wanted to talk to you about today that I've learned, and this is of a slightly different character, is that being in a fully remote environment adds friction to existing manual processes. Now, in some cases, it's a very small amount of friction. In other cases, it's a large amount of friction. But manual processes exist, throughout the public and private sector, and in some ways, they are the bread and butter of the federal government. But my point is that we should observe where those frictions have increased from being in a fully remote environment and use that to actually automate and fix our processes and to become a more efficient, data-driven organizations, or the organizations that we lead, to make them more data-driven. And so what do I mean by these frictions? Well, it's a lot harder to print out a piece of paper and walk into someone's office and ask them to sign it. That much is understood. There's a little bit more friction if you want to keep that current process of passing around a piece of paper and signing it and editing it and unsigning it and remaking it into a PDF and then signing it again. You can understand that. There's also additional friction because if you have everybody in a kind of scrum environment in an office, it's easy to shout over the cubicle and say, hey, can you answer my question about this? We can still talk to people, obviously, but it's just a little bit more difficult. And so we've been really thinking about this and looking at our processes. And one that I'm working on right now, I just want to tell you about briefly because I'm excited about it because it has it's a use case that involves artificial intelligence. And it has to do with something called the warranting process. So I'm going to quickly tell you what the warranting process is. This is a crash course in how the Treasury does one of its functions. So when Congress appropriates funds to the federal government, they often produce a 1,000+ page PDF. And that PDF comes over to Treasury and the Fiscal Service, and a team of subject matter experts start going through the PDF to pull it apart and to figure out which agency, which sub-agency, which account get this amount of money for this purpose, and the funds are available for this amount of time. And as you can imagine, that is an extremely tedious process that takes a long amount of time and requires a very specialized type of experience. And that process is actually critical to unlocking funds that Congress appropriates for agencies to use. So in addition to it taking a while and it being really tedious, there's a lot of pressure to get this done, to unlock funds in our system so that agencies can start spending money. So the pilot that we're engaged in right now is stepping back again and saying, how can we take this largely manual process and apply technology to it? So we're looking to develop an artificial intelligence algorithm that uses natural language processing to actually read the PDFs and then to turn them into structured data. This is a use case that requires natural language processing because when Congress writes appropriations, as you know, if you've ever read one, they come in paragraph form. There's not a standard approach. There's not an easy way that you can train a robot to pull out the right numbers. You need to understand syntax and the structures of the sentences in order to pull the text apart. So this is something that we're working on. And we don't anticipate that our subject matter experts would go away, but what we're trying to do is to experiment with using technology to do the tedious work and then to use our talented colleagues to review that work and to find issues with it and to correct those issues and get the right data into the system. So that's something that we're working on that I'm really excited about. And I'm also excited to learn from so that we can understand what succeeds and what doesn't succeed as we're trying to tackle these manual processes that have been around for a long time. So again, thank you so much for having me here today. And I hope that my 2 points about transparency and decision-making and looking at manual processes and using technology will be helpful to all of you.
Thank you, Justin. That was such an awesome keynote. We really appreciate you sharing that with us. So next up, I would like to introduce our first emerging technology talk of the day. We have Nick Specie, who is the Chief Federal Technologist over at Snowflake. Nick, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. And it seems the host has turned off my video, so if you'll turn that back on, I would appreciate it. There we go. There's the magic button. Hello, everyone, and good morning. I'm Nick Specie, the Chief Federal Technologist at Snowflake. It's great to have you guys here for my 15 minutes of fame. Thanks to Justin for getting us started off. Over the remainder of this summit, you're going to hear from a lot of wonderful experts about the fantastic things that artificial intelligence and data analytics are doing in the industry today. You're also going to hear about some of the fantastic things it's going to do for us in the future. I'm very excited about it, mostly because this is not that talk. I'm going to talk about something that is much, much, much more practical. I'm going to talk about, what do you feed AI? Now, obviously, the answer is we have to feed AI data. But data is just a raw resource. It powers the heart and soul of computer science and all of our branches of government and industry. But not all data is good. There's a ton of bad data out there, and our AI has to eat good, healthy data in order to thrive. Bad data outnumbers good data by a massive margin in the data world. So how do you find the great data? How do you find the real truth? And how do you find separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak? It's no one's fault that this bad data is there. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. This year, because I wasn't supposed to go out and see anyone or do anything, I decided to send out Christmas cards for the first time in my adult life. Great. I decided to send 100 of them because I've never sent them out before, and I've got some kind of internal quota in my head. And I wanted to send them to folks who I really hadn't seen in a while, because God forbid I would get one of those cards back and then have to find a place in my house to hang them. Anyway, the majority of my 100 Christmas cards made it to their destination with no problem at all. No delay, none were lost in the mail. Everything went exactly the way that it was supposed to, but some didn't. And it's the ones that didn't get there that I want to focus on in this talk. Most of the ones that went wrong, we'll get to in just a second. There was a small subset where I may have mistyped a character or miswrote an address. For example, spelling a street name wrong, or a zip code, getting that wrong, or a city name wrong, or the one zip code that had 6 digits, 3 of which were wrong because by then I'd gotten pretty far into the eggnog. All of those could easily be solved with perhaps an API call to the Postal Service. It's very common in industry for the Postal Service to offer address validation APIs to industry and private citizens. So that would have fixed that. And if you want my opinion about what makes Christmas better, an API call is definitely it, says the world's biggest geek. The bigger problem, though, was not semantic or syntactical errors in my addressing of envelopes. It was actually the stuff that was my fault because I don't keep up with my friends like I should because I'm a terrible friend. In that case, it's data that was valid, real addresses, real homes, but the people that I was sending the card to no longer lived there. I had a truth, addresses where friends lived, but it wasn't the truth. Those friends didn't live there anymore. It passed every test I could throw at it, except for one, delivery. Now, this is bad enough if you're a loser with 100 Christmas cards and a gallon jug of eggnog. It's even more serious if you're a government with, let's say, 360 million citizens and you're trying to send out stimulus checks, coordinate vaccine distribution, manage security concerns, or just trying to forecast traffic on a busy travel weekend. Customers all over the globe have started signing up to Snowflake to take advantage of what we are calling the Snowflake Data Cloud. The Data Cloud is built on top of our patented cloud architecture and enables the scope and scale of massive AI and ML data sets. More data, less problems. It all starts with direct sharing. If you have a data set that you think might be relevant to the rest of the world, Snowflake makes it very simple to share that data set with other stakeholders. There's a couple of ways we do that. We'll start with this simplest first. If I know that my data, for example, the Christmas cards that I sent out, would have been made more valid or more beneficial to somebody else, like the recipients who were getting them, I could choose to share a curated subset of my data with all of those stakeholders. It's a direct one-to-one relationship. I don't have to worry about moving the data between my account and theirs. I don't even need to worry if they're in a completely different cloud region or even cloud provider. I can simply set up a direct share from Snowflake account to another Snowflake account or a Snowflake account to a reader account. The data that is shared appears in the consumer or subscriber's account as if it was local. It looks like a local database. In fact, the consumer of my data could immediately do joins across it. They could add that data into their queries or dashboards. The data looks like it's local, but I, as a data provider, maintain full control of that data. I can take away access, change what data is presented. I can even X out the entire set all at once with a single click of a button. There's no need to FTP or to request a refresh. The data is always fresh and it's always new. Now, in the public sector, we don't do a whole lot of this one-to-one sharing. Typically, it's a community of folks who want to share data sets as the mission demands it, in which case it's our next level up. The slide you're seeing now is a picture of what we call the Interagency Data Exchange, or a private exchange. In Snowflake, you can invite other Snowflake customers to become part of an invite-only community. Only folks who have been explicitly invited to that community can contribute or subscribe to data sets listed in it. Think about it like a private app store for data sets. This is an example of what a data set might look like, or excuse me, an exchange might look like if I was NASA, inviting Goddard, Ames Research, JPL, to share and collaborate on data sets like weather observations, material science, you name it. Any data set I want to publish to my community can be published. Any data set that I want to subscribe to, if it's been published, will instantly be available. And when I subscribe to it, I get samples of how to use it, the data that's inside of it, and I can start immediately churning and using that data as part of, for example, an artificial intelligence or machine learning or data analytics problem set. The benefits here are massive. You can imagine agencies collaborating on not just the data that we have now, but data just sets that might be generated in the future. Things about usage statistics, death and birth certificates, social security information, healthcare information. Secure sharing is the ultimate way to make our society more beneficial, efficient, and better in every way. Here's an example of what some data sets might look like. Each of the folks inside of our private exchange can publish data sets as they may wish, whatever data sets they want. They're not forced into the subscribers, they're simply left up as options. So you could choose to subscribe to a data set and start using that immediately. The number of data sets available is limitless. Today, we have a ton of data sets related to everything from housing prices on Zillow to weather data from the National Weather Service, and advertising data sets from some of our industry partners. And these data sets are available for use right now in the data marketplace, which is the next layer. We said that a private exchange was like a closed community. The marketplace truly is like the App Store. Anyone can publish a public data set onto Snowflake, something that is prominently in focus in the president's management agenda. Even going into our new administration, IT modernization and data collaboration will continue to be a cornerstone of the CDO Council and their efforts around having all of us collaborating. The marketplace is phenomenal. I mentioned some of the data sets that are there. We have over 100 contributors today putting data onto the marketplace. Our government agencies, we hope, will be next. We started some of that work with the state of California. Snowflake is currently powering the COVID-19 response out in the state of California. They had a huge problem set trying to get the number of ICU beds, the amount of PPE, the number of cases tracked and resolved. Snowflake has been a great partner with the state of California, as well as the universities and medical centers out in the state, collaborate on the data to build a better treatment plan and to understand the scope of what's happening in California. A couple of years ago, this stuff would have been impossible. Solving these problems at the scale needed for an artificial intelligence workload, doing massive data analytics, was expensive. owning the amount of hardware it would take to store the amount of data and process that data in a cost-efficient and time savings manner was almost impossible. The cloud has made it possible. The endless amounts of horsepower and grunt that are currently offered from AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud make giant workloads like this no longer insurmountable. Snowflake and the data cloud that we've brought to bear in the cloud make it even easier to do massive AI workloads, to share that information with business intelligence users and other partner mission centers and operations. Snowflake is proud to be a part of this ecosystem, and we look forward to helping you with all of your problems in the future, even if it's just sending out Christmas cards, which, by the way, for everybody on the call, I'm using Shutterfly from now on. I'd like to thank all of you guys for coming out and listening to my 15 minutes. You can reach me at nicholas.spiess@snowflake.com if you have any questions. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of the show for the ATARC AI and Data Analytics Summit.
Thanks, Nick. That was awesome. Up next, we have one more emerging technology talk before our first panel of the day. I would like to go ahead and introduce David Page. He is the Vice President and Chief Architect over at EDB. Dave, please take it away.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to my talk, PostgreSQL and Machine Learning. My name's Dave Page. I work at EDB in our CTO office. I've also worked on PostgreSQL for over 20 years. I'm a member of the core team and the PG admin lead developer. So what is PostgreSQL? It's billed as the world's most advanced open source database. It's a relational SQL-based database, fully enterprise ready, and also increasingly being seen replacing Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, and other more traditional commercial systems. It's used in pretty much every sector you can think of, including government, law enforcement, and financial and healthcare. And it's quite possibly the most SQL standard compliant database there is. Perhaps most importantly for the talk today, it's highly extensible. You can have plug-in extension modules that add additional functionality, stored procedures, data types, operators, and so on. And there are a variety of procedural languages you can add, giving support for things like Python, Perl, R, and Java, and so on. So the talk today is on PostgreSQL and machine learning. The extensibility that I mentioned a moment ago gives us the perfect opportunity to combine the power of SQL with machine learning techniques. Why do we want to do this? Well, primarily flexibility. Our data is already in the database, so we can use SQL to choose and format the data that we want to analyze. SQL is designed for working with data sets, much as we'd use in machine learning. We can use standard constructs like select from, where, to select data directly from tables, but we can combine that with the use of mathematical functions and operators such as square root, log, and many, many more that are available. We can also use aggregates and window functions and common table expressions to roll up and give us the exact data that we want to analyze. So what would we want to do this for? Well, pretty much anything really. Some obvious examples, and probably in fact the most obvious use case, is regression analysis. So we can detect patterns in data and predict results. For example, customer retention or churn based on the support tickets they've logged and the average time to resolution. We could do text classification for comments on a website. We can do image classification as well if images are stored in the database, though typically we don't actually recommend doing that. Time series prediction is another favorite topic of mine. We can use time series prediction to do capacity management for server infrastructure. So how can we do this? I'm going to give a couple of examples. The first one's Apache Madlib. So this was originally developed by VMware, previously known as Pivotal, previously known as EMC Greenplum, as well as academics at UC Berkeley. It works with both PostgreSQL and Greenplum, which is a fork of Postgres designed for clustered data warehousing. The website describes it as a powerful machine learning graph, statistics, and analytics for data scientists library. what that means for us, practically speaking, in terms of doing tasks such as regression analysis, is it gives us a set of pre-built functions that we can use to perform the analytics that we need. Now, one downside with Apache Madlib is installation is somewhat convoluted. There are no pre-built RPMs or Debian packages, etc., to make deployment simple. It's certainly not impossible, but it's more difficult than we would generally like. In the screenshot on this slide, we can see Apache Madlib in use. In this case, doing a very simple regression analysis on the Boston housing dataset. It's very quick to run, and it's very quick and easy to use. As you can see, there are just 2 SQL queries, basically. And this is a great way to get started with regression-type tasks. We might also consider using the PL Python 3U procedural language. So this is one of the standard procedural languages that ships with Python. And it allows us to use any of the common Python machine learning and related libraries, for example, TensorFlow, PyTorch, and NumPy and Pandas. Because we're writing code in Python, this gives us complete control to write whatever we need. To make it work, we simply need to install the Python modules in the Python environment used by the PostgreSQL server, and then run the create function SQL commands to create the functions that we want to use. In this screenshot, we can see an example. This is a stored procedure I've written called TF model, which you pass a simple SQL query to, or a more complex SQL query if you like, that will give it the data that needs to be analyzed, pass it an array that describes the TensorFlow model to create, and the names and location of the analysis so that it knows where to store files and what to call things. And what this function is actually doing is creating the TensorFlow model, running through training. It's using techniques such as early stopping and so on. And it's generating and saving a model that we can then later call from another stored procedure. So that was a very quick overview of just a couple of the possibilities of machine learning with PostgreSQL. In conclusion, we can combine the power of SQL with machine learning. So we can do complex SQL queries to get the data sets that we want to analyze. If you want to do very quick regression analysis, then Apache Madlib is a great place to start. And if you want the flexibility of being able to write code yourself to do whatever you need, any kind of analysis at all, then PL Python 3U is a great choice. Thank you very much for your time.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dave, for that awesome presentation. I would now like to introduce our first panel of the day. The moderator for this panel will be Brandy Vincent. Brandy is a staff correspondent over at NextGov, a component of Government Executive Media Group. Brandy, over to you.
Hi, Kirsten. Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for the kind welcome, and welcome to the first panel for ATARC Summit. We're going to chat through the government's AI and data analytics use in. We've got a great lineup here. It includes Anil Choudhury, who's the Director of Federal AI Implementations in the AI Center of Excellence at GSA, Tom Harrell, an IT specialist and senior IT policy analyst in the Information Technology Resources branch at the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, or NCATS, Chakib Karobi, who is the Chief Data Scientist in the Office of Data Services at the Commerce Department's National Technical Information Service, Charles Gabriel, who's the IT project manager for the Federal Electronic Health Record Modernization, or FIRM, and Paul Moxon, SVP for Data Architecture and Chief Evangelist at Denodo. So like I said, quite a lineup here. To kick it off, we're going to do it ATARC's way. I'm going to pass it over real quick to each of my panelists. We're going to give them about 2 minutes to tell you a little bit about what they're passionate about, what they're working on, really anything that they want to share. From there, we're going to break into a Q&A portion. I've got some questions that I've created. Ask for the audience to submit some questions, and we've also got some polls for you guys to participate in. So hope you're ready. We're going to dive in. To kick it off, I'm going to hand it over to my friend Neil from GSA. Is he on here? I'm going to have him kick it off. Yep. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're up to, Neil.
So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this panel. I see a lot of familiar faces, other subject matter experts in their fields who I haven't had a chance to say Happy New Year to. So this is really good, knocking out 2 birds with 1 stone. My background has been primarily operational in nature as I moved up through my career. I'm a enlisted Army and a commissioned officer in the Army, after which I served as a presidential management fellow in the Department of Defense, specifically working with ERP implementations, and that's how old I am, right? And now, along the way, I moved to U.S. Customs and Border Protection and worked on data analytics, and specifically implementing actionable dashboards for leadership. As I moved forward, as technology progressed, I got interested in the field of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and worked really hard to help at first U.S. Customs work on projects related to cognitive science. So it's not just enough, we had a lot of good products out there in the data analytics space that can take quantitative numbers, quantitative things, numbers, whatnot, very structured data, and help leaders make meaningful decisions from there. But things like a intelligence report that somebody typed up, a photograph, a geospatial and temporal data set. How do you incorporate all that to get meaningful analysis that's prescriptive in nature, that just doesn't tell you a story of, what happened, but what might happen that you can react to, that you can manage risk against. And I did that for about 2 years at U.S. Customs before I was recruited into the Artificial Center of, the Artificial Intelligence Center of Excellence at GSA as part of their Technology Transformation Service Office. And now I support multiple federal clients, but in that same space is that not just the project, agencies are very good at understanding what their needs are and what they need to accomplish, but it's the roadmap to get there, the other long poles in the tent, the privacy assessments, the contract vehicles, the 5-year funding model that Congress requires, all those other things, the integrations with existing technologies that agencies have. That's where I come in, is to help make sure that the artificial intelligence products and machine learning products that agencies are looking at to solve their discrete real world problems now get implemented correctly so that agencies can begin executing against their mission immediately. So that's really what I do in a nutshell. And when I talk today, you'll hear me harp about, personnel development and other soft areas more than anything. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you. Once again, thank you for allowing me to introduce myself.
Of course. Thanks, Neil. And I'm excited to have you for sort of that big picture look at what's going on with agencies too. Let's hop over to Tom Harrell. Tom, tell us a little bit about what you're passionate about and what you're excited to talk about today.
Okay. Well, the excitement is truly about the NCATs, obviously. I am an IT specialist. I specialize in service management. I'm also a policy analyst. And right now I am working on, or actually crafting the ATARC clearance acquisition strategy for NCATS. And I'm on the implementation team for the PMI-AA implementation at HHS. That covers everything. When it comes to NCATS, the most magnificent thing is, I mean, our mission, it's to catalyze the generation of innovative methods, technologies to enhance the development, testing, implementation of diagnostics and therapeutics across a whole range of diseases and conditions. And so it's fascinating being there. The talent that is there is amazing. And AI and data analytics are at the core. That has enabled NCATS to be what it has today.
That's incredible. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I'm excited to dig in a little bit deeper. I know that NCATS quickly responded with some COVID-focused efforts that we'll dive into. Next, let's pop over to Chakib. Hi, Chakib. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to as the Chief Data Scientist at NTIS.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Brandy, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited about being part of this panel. Like Neil said, a lot of people that we have interacted with before, and I'm happy to work with again today. Personally, I have industrial, academic, and governmental experience. I started as a software engineer before joining academia to become a professor, and later on even a dean. And currently, I just joined NTIS about a couple of years ago as a chief data scientist. Let me share a few words about NTIS and our unique mission within the government space. I'm confident this will resonate with the audience. NTIS is a bureau within the US Department of Commerce. We provide a unique pathway for federal agencies toward innovation and digital transformation. We offer an agile and innovative framework in harnessing emerging and cutting-edge technology, including data analytics and artificial intelligence, to achieve mission outcomes effectively and efficiently and deliver data-driven solutions. The NTIS framework and authority enable us to partner up with the nation's top private sector companies, academic institutions, nonprofits, to address national data-centric challenges. It's available to all federal agencies seeking an agile capacity to scale, a quick access to private sector ingenuity and expertise to meet critical mission data priorities. Actually, currently we're supporting several projects in the governance space, including at JAIC, in the Department of Defense, with CISA at DHS, with PARM, the Program Accountability and Risk Management at DHS as well, with OCIO at DOL, OPM, FDA, with the OIG at HSS and VA, with USAID, and several other agencies. So I would love to share that with you later on with this talk. But this is the beginning of New Year, and Happy New Year, everyone. So it's time for reflection, resolutions, and hope. It's time to analyze what was successful last year and to note what wasn't. It's also time for charting out the way forward. Unfortunately, 2020 was very challenging and dark year, of course, due to the pandemic crisis. Still today, we're still confronting one of the worst disasters in human history. And but throughout history, nothing has killed more human beings than infectious disease. And COVID-19 showed us how vulnerable we still remain. And the hope is that thanks to science and technology, we will be able to avoid or mitigate similar pandemics in the future. For us, data scientists and AI experts, it was time of reckoning. We believe that AI is a transformative technology with potential of solving hard and complex problems. But how much that has AI actually really helped in tackling the current outbreak? That's a really hard question to answer, but we should start finding some answers. There were some breakthroughs and some shortcomings. It took a little bit of time for predictive models to work. And it, I think, believed is due to the lack of high quality data and the lack of capabilities for rapid data ingestion and integration. AI needs data. On the other hand, science and technology have accelerated the research and discovery of effective vaccines and the potential of using AI to predict future outbreak. In short, some would say the hype has mostly outstripped the reality, but the reality is that AI is still at the very early stage. Governmental agencies, as well as a lot of companies in the private sector, are still trying to figure out how to take advantage of AI and its amazing and transformative power. And the lesson learned is that agencies need to develop an AI roadmap, and we can talk about it later, including a data and an AI strategy. Personally, I just wrote a paper that I call the Golden Hexagon, which is a 6-pillar framework for AI adoption success that I would love to share with the audience. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Shakib. And man, you really took us through all the things I'm hoping we hit on in this panel. So thank you for highlighting that out at the top. Next up, we have Charles. Charles, I see that you're on. You might want to click on your video at the bottom of the screen if you do see that. But you're from the Federal Electronic Health Record Modernization Effort. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're passionate about and what's going on in your realm?
Thanks, Brandy. I apologize. I tried to start the video, but I'm unsuccessful. I'm going to try to be as animated as possible, given that I don't have the video. So I am the technical lead at the firm, and we have 3 work streams. The work stream that I work under is called the interoperability work stream. And you can imagine for health, interoperability is a key vital activities. I lead in particular the technical standards. HL7, if you are in healthcare, you know, the universal body for standards is HL7 for messaging, data, and how electronic health records of patient can be exchanged over IT platforms. I also, within my capacity, I interact with a lot of federal agencies, not to mention, of course, we are in the middle between DoD, VA, and Coast Guard, try to unify the electronic health records, but we have a bigger picture, hopefully within our interoperability and our standardizing the electronic health record exchange, we can provide the nation a success story and standards to go. We, on the top of DoD, VA, we interact with the National Coordinator of Health Information Technology, the ONC. We collaborate with HHS, CDC, and variety of other agencies like Social Security Administration and so forth and so on. Prior to my federal career, I was a contractor myself. I worked for IBM and several other consulting firms. And my background before joining the health workforce or in a federal workforce was in the investment banking, financial, and analytics, of course, is my background. I'm a computer scientist, and my focus in data scientist all my long career life. And one of the things that I witnessed during the last financial crisis is really analytics can save a lot of companies, including the bottom line finance and the bottom line even earnings. And on a personal level, I thought maybe I can use some of the skills instead of saving monies. Maybe I can use that to save lives and improve health and wellness. And I'm happy to share briefly some of the stuff based on the Q&A. Turn it back to you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Charles. And last but not least, we have Paul, SVP and very interesting title, Chief Evangelist from Denodo. How's it going, Paul?
It's going well. Thank you. Like you said, Brandy, the title, the glorious title, Senior Vice President of Data Architectures and Chief Evangelist. What that really means is that I spend a lot of time talking to organizations, both in the private sector and the public sector, discussing data strategies, and any data strategy inevitably involves artificial intelligence, analytics, etc. So it's interesting to see how organizations are adopting AI, adopting analytics, and compare and contrast across different countries, different regions even. How are they doing it differently in Singapore versus the US versus, say, the UK? So it's going to be fascinating to hear from my esteemed fellow panelists. Nice to see some of you again. How the COVID pandemic has affected, or in some cases not affected, their agencies. And also how AI analytics and some of the new or emerging technologies have helped them through this time and also will help them through into the future. I know some of the things that have been mentioned already. As a matter of fact, going back to the keynote from Justin, where he talked about how the Treasury has been using the COVID data of the various regions for this, going back to the office. And that's something I've been seeing in many organizations, especially in the private sector, of using a data-driven approach to safely get people back into the office, or even open stores in retailers. For banks, which branches do I staff? So it's going to be interesting to see how my fellow panelists sort of talk about how they're using AI and data within the pandemic, within their agencies. And also, Shakib mentioned, predictive models needing data and things like that. The predictive models we had in 2020, at the beginning of 2020, largely don't apply now because so much behavior has changed that people using data from January to drive their predictive models will find out those predictive models are probably inaccurate. So again, I'd love to hear from my fellow panelists about how this is affecting them as well. And I won't talk about my passions, because if I talk about my passions, Tom and I are going to go down into a rat hole about the New England Patriots and the Dallas Cowboys. And Tom, you will lose. I'm sorry.
You took away last word right there from the top. Thanks, Paul. As you kick us off with this, you're talking through all the things that I hope we're going to get through in the panel, both what we're seeing in terms of progress, what we're still seeing in terms of limitation, and what more the government needs to get to the best place it can be with AI. Reminder for our audience, we're going to kick into the Q&A now. I see you guys are starting to send in questions at the bottom of your screen on the Q&A portion. Keep doing that. We also have some polls on the way. But for the first question from me, I'm gonna kick it off to Neil. The AI Center of Excellence really works to broadly advance federal AI implementations and help agencies on their AI journeys towards adoption. You have a really unique vantage point. We're all pretty interested in sort of what we're seeing across agencies. So what are you seeing in terms of AI data analytics being adopted during the pandemic in the modern time for modern purposes?
Thank you so much for that question and for offering me up first. I'm just kidding. So, as part of our mission set, my organization, the Technology Transformation Service, is really about leveraging private sector innovation and government expertise, right, in best practices for a holistic, sustainable transformation. So it's about leveraging commercially available solutions and expertise from industry to deliver outcomes to programs. So, I just needed to clarify that I'm not working with a bunch of, other government employees and we are developing proprietary products. No, this is about taking best of breed from industry and helping put that in government. And the types of projects where you see we do this, right? And especially, I can't speak to the other centers of excellence, but specifically with the AI Center of Excellence, the types of projects we focus on are like fraud detection, especially when large sums of money is involved. So we were recently involved with an organization to ensure, to help go through lots of big data sets to see, whether we could pinpoint a fraud, especially as it related to the loans, and the loan guarantees. There's suicide prevention. There's with natural disasters, with the Department of Defense, with firefighting and flood, and also with pandemic supply chain modeling, so that what you're not doing is sending truckloads of water somewhere where they need gloves. So how can you build resiliency in the supply chains so that you are pushing things that are needed the most at a particular phase in time in the pandemic? So those are the type of big projects we work on, but part of that transformation is making sure that we help our partners move along that cognitive path, of descriptive, diagnostic to predictive to prescriptive. So it's not just being, a lot of organizations are very good at descriptive when they put their annual agency reports out there, what we did, and even diagnosing problems. They're very good at saying, this is what our problem is. But it's the predictive where we struggle a little, where we say, what is our range of acceptable choices that we can use? That's predictive. And prescriptive is one even better, which it's not about just telling us about our choices, but using artificial intelligence to augment our decision making to say, this is where what the computer thinks you should do. And the computer has been right so often, based on the expert input when we built the model, the experts built the model. So this is what is prescribed that you should do, and more likely than not, you'll succeed doing that. So that's that mindset when we try to shift where, we say taking advice, not listening to the computer, but taking advice from an algorithm. And it's not just taking orders from an algorithm, but it's the taking advice from an algorithm and then using your experience and judgment to decide whether or not to use that output, right? So that's where we work all across government to make sure that the tools from industry, those proven tools from industry are being used in government to drive delivery of citizen services. So I think I've said quite a bit there, and I'll wait for further questions and the other panelists to also chime in. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Neil. You got us off to a good start with sort of what is AI good for in this sense. I want to bump it over to Chakib, because in your intro, Chakib, you touched on a sort of range of use cases that you guys have seen more recently. You mentioned with the Jake, I know Neil just spoke about AI use for supply chain, and the Jake's Project Salus was a great example of that. But from your perspective, Chakib, what are some recent use cases that have popped up that you guys have been recently working on that really are worth highlighting in this conversation?
Absolutely, thank you. Yes, with at NTIS, we have this chance to actually work on so many different projects in so many federal agencies, and each federal agency is unique because they have a unique mission and specific objectives. But at the same time, we're able to see that there is some commonality, of course, because at the foundation, if you want to apply AI, there is several things that you have to have in place. We spend a lot of time with the federal agency actually helping them structure the collection of the data, enhance the quality of the data, and then having the talent to help them manage the data and process it so we can actually use it, and develop with them machine learning models to implement predictive modeling or prescriptive modeling, like Neil mentioned. So but the range of applications is so wide. Actually, my message today is to let us as federal agency, a government agency, we need to be bold and ambitious. There is no time to waste. Data never sleeps. So the sooner we get the capabilities to actually process the data, structure the data, enrich the data, the better. So just some examples, like you mentioned, Jake, we work with Jake on issue of cybersecurity operations. So that include network event detection, user activity monitoring, and network mapping. How can we use AI to actually enable us to strengthen our national security, our cybersecurity systems, etc. We worked with CISA to strengthen how we mitigate and even prevent risk to the physical and cybersecurity national infrastructure. we worked with the DOE, Department of Energy, and at the NNSA, which is the National Nuclear Security Administration, which their mission is to maintain a safe, secure, and effective nuclear weapons stockpile. So how can they use AI to increase the effectiveness of the knowledge capture and transfer as their scientists retire, as well as perform safety oversight more efficiently? With USAID, we were helping them support the PMI project, the President Malaria Initiative, literally eventually to save lives. And with the OIG at AHS and VA, we worked on fraud, waste, and abuse, how to use AI to actually help them manage better their resources. They have human resources, like Neil said. AI is there to help, to advise. And the good way to do that is to use is to preserve the resources for high-level decisions. So the automation and AI will do the work and try to highlight where there might be some problems. And then you bring in the expert in fraud analysis and fraud analytics to come in and then try to dig into more depth to see if there is actually actual acts of fraud or actual act of abuse from et cetera. So that's what we're working on. And again, NTIS is here to provide the help, because innovation is not easy. So whenever you want to innovate, you have to do something new. And it's very difficult to start something new without guidance and without structure and without expertise. So that's what we're trying to bring into these agencies. Let's get started. And then we start usually with a prototype that will help basically show that how AI can help in a particular specific problem and how that can be expanded across the agency to achieve mission outcomes.
That's great. And it's really interesting to hear the range of applicability that we have here. You also move us into our first poll question. I think now that it's been about halfway through our panel, Kirsten or Alyssa, I think you have to help me out with putting that live. But for our audience, how long would you think it takes to execute an AI project after the project idea is initially approved? You can go ahead and interact and support. That'll give us a look into it. But from what we're hearing, it also seems like it's depends on potentially the individual sometimes too, for a lot of these different use cases that we're choosing to see through these agencies. Right, so there's the reaction to our poll. And then I'd love to have, would one of our panelists like to weigh in with a reaction to the results of our poll? Put it into perspective or anything.
Let me start by saying that an AI project is like a living software. It goes on forever because it's like Paul mentioned, is that it's based on the data. It has to be. We have to keep training the model with new data and relevant data. So we have a fundamental data challenge, and it's critical that the data is not only needs to be refreshed, but also need to be varied. It has to come from different sources to make that model stronger. But to address the question is that you need to get started. If you don't get started, so the sooner the better, because even if your model is imperfect in the beginning, even if your accuracy is not well, and then if you need to, that's the starting point, because an AI solution is to be improved every day and basically forever.
Okay, can I chime in on that?
Absolutely, Tom.
I agree with you, Chakrib. However, with NCATS, it was formed in 2011, at the end of 2011. And it's a center, so it's not a single focus on one particular disease. So at the inception, NCATS recognized the significant opportunities of bringing artificial intelligence and automation to bear on medicinal chemistry. That would expand the landscape of the degree of chemical space explored during the medicinal chemistry campaigns and bring a systematic approach to structure activity studies. To wit, NCATS formed an initiative called a specialized platform for innovative research execution, or ASPIRE. And that enables NCATS to collaborate on a global basis, because NCATS is primarily collaborative, not only within the NIH and HHS, but with DARPA, ARPA, with the VA, with pharma, with foreign governments. We have created a warehouse of COVID data. And you guys can actually go into our website and look at that. It's called N3C.
Yep. I'm so happy you're bringing this up, Tom, because this is where we were going to go next. So
okay.
Tell us all about N3C and the Enclave and what you're seeing with speedy data access.
Well, you know, it's rather amazing the amount of data that is in there being collected from all across the world on COVID, and in collaboration with even with NCI, where NCI and the NCATS using this Enclave and these data warehouses, you're able to extend your research beyond just COVID. When you start to look at comorbidities and similarities between diseases, it enables you to get to a treatment faster, which is the mission of NCATS. So I would definitely want you guys to take a look at it, ncats.nih.gov, and you'll see that there's the N3C there, along with other things that you can look at. But it's pretty amazing. But the COVID store. Oh, the other thing that's important when it gets into AI and data analytics, and someone mentioned earlier about the quality of data. That really is important. So what NCATS has decided to do is to use a data broker to make sure that the data coming into the enclaves are clean, to make sure that we can get around any of the regulatory issues on privacy. And, you know, this keeps the data pure. It enables the scientists to do the two things they like: ask a question and get an answer, okay? So, and, you know, since we actually grew that way, AI and data analytics is just part of the culture at NCATS. I mean, everyone's a part of it. There wasn't any swift change when we did the shutdown because we're already collaborative. I think the biggest challenge was making sure we got laptops to everyone that needed them, which was very easy. The NIH has developed a very robust network. So that, you know, the only challenge we really had was, okay, if you were doing a huge webinar or meeting, disconnect from VPN because it would slow everything down, and then we could go back in. But that was it.
Yeah, well, that's great, Tom.
Sorry, Brandy, just want to respond to something that Shakib said about, you know, you're building a predictive model and it may be imperfect, but you can put it out there and you can refine it. That somewhat depends on what that predictive model's doing. If that's deciding whether somebody gets benefits or not, you can't have something that's inaccurate. There's, you know, so you have to look at the quality. What is the actual project? So when people say it'll take between, was it 1 to 3 months or 3 to 6 months? I can't remember what the result was for the poll. You know, that's like asking how long's a piece of string? It depends on the actual project. If I'm deciding whether somebody's going to get housing benefits and I'm building a predictive model, I'd better make sure that is very, very accurate. I'd make sure from an ethics point of view that my data is good data, clean data. I've removed all biases, because the last thing I want is somebody taking me to court. So you have to be very careful when you say it's a predictive model, we can refine it in subsequent iterations. If it's public, you may have egg on your face. You've got to be very, very careful there.
Let me answer, Paul, because you mentioned, I absolutely agree. I didn't mean to deploy the model. I say to develop a prototype. So you can learn. It's a learning process to develop a model. So all the issues that you mentioned, they are part of that process. When you develop a prototype, then you start like analyzing the quality of your model. And that's where you figure out that you are missing some model or your data is biased and so on and so forth. This is part of the development process. I didn't mean to deploy the model and start applying it and learn from it. Yeah. No, absolutely not.
No, I trust you to keep. And I know Anil and I have had previous discussions where we've talked about the ethics of all this. It has to be part of that process, but most people seem to think, oh, I've got a prototype. We're good. Let's go with it. And that's far from the truth.
No, I agree, of course. I think the key in the future, and especially as we talk about like epidemics and stuff like this, is and to relay what Tom was mentioning about the data, is the key in the future is going to be collection intelligence. That means the how to be able to collect, aggregate, and correlate information from different kind of systems. So it's not enough just to actually collect data about COVID. We need to look at other areas, not from hospitals or whatever. We need to look at social media, at interaction between people. This is how you start. Now there is the capabilities from AI, especially in natural language processing systems. Last year we had a breakthrough with the GPT-3, which is the most powerful NPL algorithm so far, with 175 billion parameters that will allow us to actually understand better the text that is there, analyze better social media, etc. So that will help us actually sometimes detect epidemics around the world and in different languages. So to not only rely on medical data or from or public data or something like this, but also in private sectors like social media and others, to start like try to detect if there is something there that is going that is an outlier that may help us predict and detect outbreaks or other disasters.
Thanks, Chakib. And you guys all hit on ethics and bias, which we're going to go through in a second. But I want to stick on this data access, exchange, interoperability topic for a second and go to Charles, who with Firm, I think, sits kind of at the heart of information exchange. And so with you, Charles, I want to talk about sort of progress we're seeing with interoperability and even access here, but also what are the limitations and challenges that exist when you also want to pull in all these different sources of data to get the biggest picture that we can?
Thank you for the question. That would lead me to comment on the survey or the poll. I think the majority of people said, I think 32% put a 1 to 6 months as a time frame to get the data. That's fantastic. I think it's very optimistic. I mean, I wish we had this time frame. But as everyone said, I mean, if you think about what would be the question that you're gonna answer and how you're gonna integrate this data from a variety of resources to enrich the data, that's by itself is a journey. Definitely, you can put a scope and time frame around it, but not definitely. I would love to see that organization that can do something within 1 to 6 months or even a year. However, if we look at the back, and I think the panel touched on it, if you look at the health crisis that that's ongoing in our nation and of course around the world, if you look at it, it's actually an information crisis as well. I mean, when in an absence of vaccination, medication in the beginning of the crisis, the only thing we had is information, and the only thing we can help to prevent the spread of the disease is only information. So so definitely that's something that we need to look at it from interoperability perspective. Some people also, Shakib touched on social network as a source for data. I dealt with not only social network, but also social, what we call it in health industry, social determinants of health. Mm-hmm. How your lifestyle as a community, as a population health, your lifestyle, your wellness, your access to resources can impact the spread of the epidemic or preventive measures. So that's stuff that I just want to highlight. I'm happy to expand on those pieces, but that's part we at the firm, we are taking a huge investment for how we can standardize the social determinants of health in terms of data collection, putting a lot of effort on the universal standards for how to collect those type of data, how to use those data from analytics, how do we link those data to health outcomes, and even measure the level of wellness and health within a community. Over.
Absolutely.
No.
Can I just add something to that?
Yeah.
N3C was first conceived in May of last year. We see where it is today. You know, I think it's going to depend upon what organization is building this and what their mission is. If you look at NCATS, because we also are responsible for trying to develop some remedies for rare disease. There are over 5,000 rare diseases. There's treatment for maybe 700. Okay, so we have data coming globally from there. But it's that core of scientists and researchers, chemists, biologists that are all working on these platforms, harmonizing data. There's a CTSA program that has like 60 biomedical research institutions, all called hubs, that work together to bring data in. And NCATS has learned how to harmonize that data so that you're getting this one picture. CD2H, which Charles, I think you were referencing there, that's rolled in. So what you have is this, it's just like a biomedical lab on steroids. And that really is what NCATS is. We ask questions that no one, well, some people ask in their heads. And when you ask an NCATSian, as we call ourselves, a question, you're going to get an answer rather rapidly. They just go into warp speed to make it happen. You have to. When you realize that the NIH itself, I mean, quite simply put, we have to improve the human condition, okay? And that's global. And you don't have time to sit and, well, what if I do it this way or that way? We have to come together as a community, share that data. And when it comes to some of the social media and things that are out there, the behavioral aspects, NCATS is gathering that data also so that you can get this 360-degree view of a community or a situation. It's rather amazing. I'm absolutely amazed every day.
Yeah, I was just reporting on what recent partnership you guys are doing with synthetic data that had billions, billions of rows from COVID data. So it's honestly promising to hear that those things are going on. I want to switch real quick to ethics and bias. Those things were coming up throughout our conversations. I'm curious to know, how are considerations being made around the responsible use of AI and data technology really evolving in this time? Recently, we saw the president's executive order on the responsible use of AI. Does that go far enough? What more would we like to see? What impacts are these sort of actions having on the ground at agencies when it comes to thinking about bias in this realm? Neil, you're nodding a lot. I'm going to go to you first. What are you seeing? What can you tell us about this?
So, I'm still, it's that poll question, we could have talked about that poll question for 4 hours, right? I think that's such an interesting topic. And you know, the fact that 20% of people said we don't know, right?
Right.
And
well, Neil, we have one more poll question that's very similar that we could put live while you're talking right now, if Kirsten and Alyssa are for it.
But you know, on that point, you know, where people said they don't know, we don't know because across the federal space, we haven't rationalized the process of data governance, of ethics, you know, of analyzing ethical constraints. And, you know, like a couple of my other esteemed colleagues mentioned, you know, the ethical implications of, you know, benefits determination versus, you know, which gate to open up at a airport. Those are very different problem sets. You know, we could deal with a, you know, algorithm that didn't work well, and now we just have a line that's 2 minutes longer versus somebody who didn't get a check and is now getting evicted. So, you know, very different sets. So, you know, the, you know, and it goes back to tying about how long it takes, is that if the organizations don't have the experience with developing and analyzing an AI project from its ethical framework, from the privacy impact analysis, from having done worked on a data sharing agreement and data governance agreement with another agency, because other agencies are rightfully concerned about what are you going to do with my data and what are the odds that you're going to misinterpret my, you know, the data that we have collected for a specific purpose and use it for another purpose it wasn't intended for. So, you know, those are what causes the long pole in the tent where, you know, a project, you know, if you have a mature data science organization like NCATS, you know, you can execute a project within 6 months, but for organizations without mature data science practices where they don't have the data governance aspects, the ethics, you know, how to, you know, how to write a contract for a cloud vendor with the correct KPIs and KPPs in there. So, you know, you can manage costs. If they don't have experience with that, the initial AI project could take up to 2 years to just even get off the ground, you know, and that's where, you know, and I'll just end with a question I saw on, you know, from people listening to this was from Mike, who said, what's the best path to introduce new AI technology to companies, you know, to the federal government? And I would say for small companies, you know, because that's near and dear to me, small companies who don't typically have the infrastructure to spend a ton of time on BD and exploration, is to engage with every agency's small business office, because those individuals in those offices are chartered to help you navigate the bureaucracy of getting your unique product in front of federal program managers. You know, and typically with almost every organization, we have innovation teams, specifically, typically in the CTO's office, but sometimes in, you know, in some operational offices. But for businesses, the best path to get an answer and quick, correct answer is to engage with your small business office at an agency that you want to work with. So, you know, I'll leave it at that and, you know, wait for your other poll question. Data sharing agreement. Yes, about 1.5 years is about right, depending on if you get lawyers involved. No, I'm just kidding.
If I may comment on the data sharing agreements, I do a lot of data sharing agreement. I have good experience. So this is the one that really not necessarily takes so much of a time if you do your homework as someone from outside. And that brings me to kind of a recommendation and advice to the industry. If you want to really do data sharing agreement and you don't have experience with the specific of the organization, I would highly recommend do the homework before you go draft the data sharing agreement or ask the questions. Get the sample. It would be great if you have the similar domain or the similar context, but if not, get sample of 3-4 data sharing agreement, and I think you can obtain that very easily. Study them, read them before you go to the meeting, and I think you can narrow the the process from 6 months to maybe 1 month or 2 months maximum, depends on the topic. But definitely this one is not as long as the integrating data and building a model or predictive model or even regular analytics reports. Over.
Great. Thank you so much, Charles. And thanks again, audience, for submitting responding to our polls and for submitting your questions. I'm going to hop over to one more of those that we had come through. On ethics, who has reviewed the ethical application artificial intelligence framework that Neil and Shakib contributed to, and do you recommend it? Neil and Shakib, you can also weigh in.
I was going to say, I assume Neil and Shakib are both ready.
I think that work is definitely worthwhile, and I advise all the audience to go and look at it. It's a great start for federal agencies to start looking into ethical issues that they're going to be facing. And it's very important to address the data ethics in any federal data strategy, and as well as in any agency data strategy and AI strategy. But I want to make a couple of points also in that regard. Is that AI is actually just exposing and amplifying the bias that already exists in human systems. And that's why it is so difficult to actually tackle those ethical issues. And that's why we need to invest more into how to make it practical. So agency actually will implement those. Paul mentioned some issues, and Neil as well, about some, for instance, if you're getting some benefits from the government, et cetera, and if the data is biased, it's going to reflect on the impact of those programs. And that's why we have to look at as compared to what? I mean, bias exists right now. And to the introduction to AI, and if we want to really be confident and trust AI-based solutions, we need to tackle the issue finally of bias by looking at the data that we collect, by looking at the bias that can be introduced by algorithms, and then constantly monitor the impact of that solution to definitely tackle bias and increase confidence and trust in AI-based solution, increase transparency, accountability, and fairness. But I definitely will encourage everyone to read that great report that a lot of people from the private industry, from government, more than 135 people participated, not just Neil and myself, to get that out, and it's a very good start.
That's great. Thanks, Shakib. And with the last few minutes of time we have, I did want to turn it back over real quick to Paul. Paul, at the start of this, you've been playing the avid listener and sometimes devil's advocate for some of these questions, and we really appreciate it. But at the start of this, you talked about how you kind of have this unique vantage point into both kind of the international landscape and the commercial landscape as well. So I was just wondering, from what you've heard today and from what you're seeing, how is the federal government measuring up when it comes to this sort of technology, these sort of deployments at a time when they're needed?
I have to say I'm sort of almost going to play devil's advocate, but I won't. I'll be honest. I think that the saddest thing for the federal government is it is so underestimated in the public perception of what the federal government does. If you go out onto the street and ask the average person, you're still using the abacus. And they only really notice the federal government when something goes wrong. They don't notice when you do everything right. They only notice when things go wrong. And that's one of the sort of the burdens that the federal government and the state governments as well have to bear, that you're invisible until it goes wrong, and then everybody hates you. But I do seriously believe that the federal government is, different agencies obviously at different levels of use of AI and data and analytics, etc. They compare very, very well with the private sector. I know Anil's work is sort of doing joint collaborations with the private sector. Everybody looks up at Google's and they look up at the Facebooks of this world, but the federal government is doing huge work, amazing work in some of these areas. I mean, Tom mentioned some of the things that they're doing at NCATS and stuff like that. Nobody else in the world other than government agencies are doing work like that. It's amazing stuff. And it was good, you know, Justin at the very beginning talking about the work they've done of using data for taking people back to the office safely. That's the same as the public sector. They're not doing anything that is revolutionary in the private sector, other than, you know, it's the same sort of stuff. Getting the data, getting the qualified data. Johns Hopkins is usually the place they go to get it. And then integrating that with their own internal data to decide when it's safe for people to come back from the offices based on the COVID prevalence in their different locations, their counties, etc. So the federal government is actually doing a lot better than the public perception. And that's always, I think, one of the challenging things for my colleagues on the panel, is that people don't realize how well the federal government actually does this stuff. Because usually it's behind the scenes and it's, you know, it's not publicized like Google and all these other companies like to publicize all the great things they're doing. The federal government just goes away and does it quietly. There's no big song and dance when Tom's team does something special around a new infectious disease or something like that. Whereas Google shout it from the mountaintops, which means you tend to get drowned in the noise. But I actually think that it's a shame that forums like this weren't seen by people on Main Street more often to understand and appreciate how much work the federal government does.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Yeah, I wasn't being devil's advocate.
Yeah, that was kind of the opposite there. I saw all of our panelists nodding along, so I know they appreciate that perception. And I appreciate all of you for participating in this panel with me. I think this was a great discussion. I know you guys probably could have interjected and gone for way much longer than we did. So I'm looking forward to even more great insights from you guys down the line. Thank you, ATARC, for having us. And with that, I'll pass it back on over to you guys for your next event.
Just one comment. I'm really very thrilled to be part of this panel, and I would like to continue offline collaborating with my colleagues, if that's okay with you guys. There are many things I want to visit, especially Tom. Tom, I want to learn about the NCATs. You talked highly about NCATs. If you are open, I would love to see how we can collaborate.
That's great.
Only for you.
Excellent. Well, thank you to our panelists, and thank you, Brandy, for leading the conversation. Up next, we are going to have another emerging technology talk, and we will be hearing from Nick Saki. Nick is the principal engineer over at Pure Storage. Nick, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Kirsten. Apparently, I can't go on video. There we go. Thanks. All right, good afternoon, and thank you all so much for joining. I wanted to, take a couple of minutes to talk about the state of artificial intelligence enterprise compute infrastructures, and to give the audience a sense of, where we're seeing the evolution of federal government and really across the industry, AI and machine learning operations development and the tools to enable that. So, clearly, several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, AI was in its relative infancy within the federal government in terms of bringing it from theory and laboratory practice into much wider scale production. And what we discovered as we went along was that the systems of yesterday designed to do data warehouse, large scale database, enterprise virtualization, end user compute were tuned to a workload with a very different set of characteristics than those that predominate within artificial intelligence and machine learning operations. So there were a lot of small projects, pilot efforts built on perhaps individual workstations. Data sets were a lot smaller relative to what was going to be leveraged in production. So what we could know was in a large perspective, limited by the tools we had to accomplish the job. And of course, the breadth of expertise across the community. Obviously, the amount of talent and human capital that's been brought to bear in this compute problem space has grown dramatically over time. So where we find ourselves today is at a place where we have a better sense of what AI can do for us, or rather what we would like AI to do for us. And most agencies that that we're encountering at Pure Storage are already developing or implementing their AI strategies. problem prioritization really has been one of the biggest challenges in agencies embarking upon an AI journey. It's, what are they going to do first, and what do they do second, and what do they need in order to be able to accomplish this? So the industry response has been to create capability, AI infrastructure, hardware and software, specifically built to address this kind of scale challenge in computing. Then, of course, there's the data challenge, which was discussed in the previous panel at great length about agency information sharing. What data do we have? Who has it? Can we get access to it? Is it, potentially useful to the problems we're trying to solve and the questions we're trying to ask? Of course, we've learned a lot about what kind of skills we need. What do data scientists do? What skills do they have to bring to bear? Not only in the analysis of the information sets themselves, but of course in the development of the AI algorithms and the iterative development of those capabilities. And lastly, we've seen much broader partnerships across industry, academia, and the government particularly to make advancements in genomic research, virology, epidemiology, but as well as other inferencing and predictability or predictive analytics types of capabilities. So while the government has, of course, had a tremendous charge and a very vested interest in the successful outcome, industry partners and academic partners also have, significant challenges, and they're trying to solve with data sets that are really rather extraordinary when you consider, several hundred million to billions of people interacting on information platforms. What can be learned from how they behave, or images that they upload, conversations that they have, or the way that they try to interact with each other across language barriers. So the challenges of scale are compute was never really built to do this, not in a broad sense of generally available and generally deployed types of compute capability. The types of capabilities that AI leverages are massive degrees of parallelism, concurrency, and throughput, particularly when training algorithms, as well as the kind of DevSecOps sort of iterative process, CI/CD pipelines for algorithm development. So a number of things had to come together to make that happen. GPUs became very popular because they're designed for this massive type of parallelism in what are, relatively speaking, very compact packages. And the NVIDIA DGX systems are a noteworthy example of this, and their ilk. Cisco's platforms, Dell's platforms, and HPE's platforms all leverage the same kind of core technology to provide supercompute level capability in a very consumable package. But then you get into the challenges of how do you process that much data, because the massive parallelism and throughput necessary, as well as the concurrency of access to data sets, becomes fairly overwhelming for traditionally designed data service platforms. And the data service component within an AI architecture can significantly accelerate or significantly hinder the development and training and subsequent deployment of algorithms against the problem sets that we're trying to accomplish. So the government has had a number of successes through a number of different avenues that obviously leverage cloud computing capability from the CSPs, but they've also invested in on-premises infrastructure where it makes sense to do so. The benefit being that the kind of capability that you can buy today with multi-petabyte or multi-petaflop compute capabilities within your own infrastructure without having to build whole buildings in order to house it is a pretty tremendous and empowering capability. But and what this gives you is a turnkey infrastructure for applying data, adding your algorithms, and a built-in development framework built on industry standards to actually start creating, experimenting and creating AI capability. And Pure Storage is proud to have been, a significant partner in the evolution of this kind of computational capability and service for our customers in government and academia, and of course, commercially in industry. So I guess one of the big challenges that agencies have are how do you standardize and scale this AI infrastructure? And there are a number of questions that sort of get begged by that question. How big is the data set and how available is it? Is this an open source data set? Is it constrained to a given agency on the basis of security classification? Is the issue a small data problem or is it a large data problem? So obviously AI is trained most effectively against massive data sets that they can iterate against over and over again. But moving that kind of data has its own challenges. especially if you don't have, an end-to-end architecture that's designed to provide that kind of throughput and scale. Is this infrastructure going to have to grow from an initial pilot and proof of concept to production scale, agency-wide scale, government-wide scale, or internet-wide scale? So we've had a number of instances where we see some tremendous success in deploying this kind of capability and then making it available as a service. We talked or heard from the National Cancer Institute earlier in the Health and Human Services Department, and they've done tremendous groundbreaking work on cancer pathology and genomics, and their infrastructure is broadly used across the whole scope of the agencies that are trying to solve these tremendous challenges of, obviously, COVID, but also the more traditional ones in genomics research and cancer research. And most recently, we've seen a story released from the U.S. Navy, the Naval Surface Warfare Center Crane Laboratory is one of the Navy's artificial intelligence centers of excellence, and they have made available their infrastructure that they began developing and deploying about 3 years ago as a service catalog that potentially enables all DoD agencies to leverage the most advanced technology for AI and machine learning development, training, and deployment. So we're starting to see the evolution of centers of excellence and capability centers that can enable agencies to go from thinking about AI to postulating about AI to napkin sketches to actually doing it and achieving their objectives without necessarily having to make a massive upfront capital investment. Going the other way, obviously, there's certain capabilities and platforms that are available from the cloud service providers. And on that side, in the as a service area, you got to give a lot of credit to Amazon, Microsoft, and Google for going through the very difficult process of creating a service offering that meets the government's very stringent security standards. But the ability to do innovation doesn't have at its core problem, what do I consume? What do I buy? What does my agency use? Now it's really, how do we want to do it? But very importantly, how are we going to continue to grow it as our efforts become more than just theoretical or experimental? So when agencies started to define their pipeline methods and challenges, their processing issues, their ingest issues, then we tend to start having very, very meaningful conversations about what is the engine you need in order to be able to make this happen. So it was also said, people very frequently misunderstand or misrepresent the government's ability to bring to bear a tremendous volume, velocity, and variety of data, as well as the expertise of the people in addressing these challenges. And the US government is very fortunate to have some very, very brilliant scientists, data scientists, academics, and professionals in the artificial intelligence and machine learning space. It's not surprising. They've been doing it for a very long time, all things considered. The history of AI really begins in government research. But when you start looking at just the breadth of data and the breadth of capability and the breadth of the problem set, tailor-made AI infrastructure, whether it's GPUs or specific chips or hardware deployed in cloud service platforms, tensor processing units that enable that kind of innovation and iteration. So, when you talk the platform of tomorrow, which is really being deployed today, it has to be agile and adaptable. You have to disaggregate the components of network, compute, and storage to get a seamless API addressable capability that lets the data scientists focus on the data science problem and not on wrangling or beating the infrastructure into submission to make it work. Open source frameworks like Caffe2, Kafka, TensorFlow have really given us an accessible set of open source technologies that form a common understanding of the tool sets and their capabilities. So again, it solves a problem of what tools do I have to have in order to do my job or to address this challenge. You don't have to make the tools anymore. You simply have to know how to leverage them. So the infrastructure that we've seen developed enables this kind of iterative adaptation over time. The software frameworks are usually built within the Kubernetes containerization environment. The hardware infrastructure is often built on GPU-based platforms. And then all flash data service platforms and high performance network links have provided the kind of throughput and data service to enable that massive degree of parallelism and concurrency that millions of GPUs will beat on in order to feed their hungry data appetites. So when we look across, how do you proceed as an agency, whether you're really beginning your AI journey or you've progressed along in it, you got to start by implementing an automation strategy of really starting with one small simple thing, but then start automating the next thing and the next thing, and develop layered automation of the data sets and algorithms and processes so that you can get that iterative machine learning operations flow and progressively become more and more productive. Our job in the industry from where we sit is to make the tools that facilitate getting as much work done on the problem and minimizing the amount of work that has to be done, making the infrastructure work. So if you think about like the data pipeline, it often starts with a simple labeling and tagging of given data sets. That then feeds into another process that enriches that data, and then feeding another process that enriches or enhances that data. And all that time, the data service infrastructure, the compute infrastructure necessary to do this is never at rest, but it has to be able to support that continuous, iterative, and large-scale learning model and training model. So as an outcome of all of that, the models and the tool chains evolve and refine in order to support the mission. And the great thing about having a common service infrastructure like this is those practices and even those algorithms can be shared across agencies and employed against different data sets, potentially employed against different problem sets than were originally envisioned. That's very much like human intelligence. So brains are remarkably adaptable, and AIs are growing to be, equally adept at being applied against different data sets. So as particular algorithms evolve or improve, they can be inserted into the pipeline to provide more tailored results, supporting the agencies and mission needs. But it really, really has to be anchored by an infrastructure that can support that type of adaptive application and development techniques. So I want to thank you all very much for your time, and I'm really looking forward to the panel later. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm very happy to help. So thanks, Kirsten.
Thanks, Nick. That was awesome. Next up, we have another emerging technology talk where we will be hearing from David Humphrey. David is the CTO and product manager idle over at Micro Focus. And David, we look forward to hearing from you. Please take it away.
Hi, everybody. Can you see my screen, Kirsten?
Yes, I can.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, as I said, I'm the CTO for idle. What we specialize in is artificial intelligence on unstructured data, human data, words, video, images, etc. And where that actually comes into significant use is in the area of open source intelligence, which we have numerous deployments and numerous use cases. So it's all about applying the right AI tool, the right machine learning tool to different types of data to actually give you a fused approach so that you can get an answer based on not just your text, not just your video, not just your web pages, but bring it all together to extract maximum value. It was interesting what the last talk was about, because we started this in 1994 with TI DSP chips on dedicated boards to do neural networks. And it's only really up to today that we can start delivering some of the algorithms that were designed way back then, but just couldn't actually have the hardware to run to deliver that activity. And what we're all about is maximizing the ability to collect. So it's getting from as many sources as possible: web, broadcast, satellite, internal archives, you name it, we connect to it. And then the important thing is, once you've connected to a source, to be able to extract the contents of that source. If you've got a 15-year-old Word document that's sitting on a web somewhere, what's inside it? If you've got a zip document, what's inside that zip? And once you've got the stuff out, then you need to analyze it. Has it got text? Has it got videos? Has it got audios? I say, what language is it in? Can you work in that language? An interesting use case for that is if you consider the dark web. Now, with most web crawling activities, you point at a website and you say crawl to a depth of 5, and the system just pulls in all information. It's a bit like opencast mining. Well, we've now actually started to put AI at the edge. So when we actually mine a website, or mine particularly the dark web, the system uses its intelligence and uses AI technology to understand what the content's about and be able to follow effectively gold seams of data And that A is much quicker to get the information in your system, and B reduces noise in your system, which is incredibly important. But it's all about scalability. So AI can scale, it can adapt, but it's not like a human. It's not inquisitive, it's not inventive. So we need both parts of this. So what we say our job is to use AI to drive actionable conclusions as fast as possible via an intelligence officer. So it's getting that unstructured data, getting masses of it, enriching it with different forms of enhancement, maybe entity extraction, classification, sentiment, or speech to text, facial recognition, that sort of stuff. Applying that enhancement to the original data, and then applying further analysis to bring to the attention of the officer pertinent information that they then make decisions on. The other important thing is in the concept of AI on unstructured data is prior knowledge. Prior knowledge is incredibly important. An AI based on machine learning can have masses of prior knowledge, much more than a human could ever understand. And we will get better results, be able to spot associations, correlations, and just improve the overall data enhancement. And then, as I said earlier, the fact that we work across text, audio, video, and image allows you to fuse answers from different sides of the picture, allow you to get a more 360 view on the activities going on. So here's just a couple of examples, which are pretty straightforward. So geofiltering, so understanding where your data is from. So in the simplest case, that's because the data tells you where it's from. But quite often that's not the case. So in some aspects, we've had to read the location of the video because the video is imprinted with the location. We might have to interpret what the thing is talking about. So somebody might be blogging and they mention certain locations, and we extract that with entity extraction and use that to understand where it's about. Or in really specific cases, we have 2 or 3 documents and we put them together to infer a derived location, not because it's mentioned anywhere, but because we've got multiple facts actually allow us to achieve a third fact. So that's all about being able to understand, have I got an issue close to something of interest, whether it's a power plant, whether it's some sort of right near a shop. And we have other people use this for logistics planning. So knowing where things are going on, where should I route my convoys, etc. Categorization is another thing we do. So this is all about understanding what is being spoken about. So it's not keyword search, it's not using Boolean technology. It's really deeply understanding what that news article about, what that web page is about, what that Twitter might be about. And then using that to classify it in certain ways. So in this example, we're classifying news types. So we're allowing you to understand what's the volume of news over a time period and see how it changes. This is on news. We've had people use this for just incidents in a factory. The other interesting use case of this is quite often people used to do in open source intelligence segmentation of video based on 30-second or 3-minute clips. Well, what we can do is understand what the story is about. So we segment the video based on the actual content. So each news item gets segmented according to what it's talking about, not just because it's 30 seconds. Then we apply sentiment. So this is to understand change in public opinion, to understand if there's any change in a political sway of a news channel. You know, they were pro-right one week, they've gone slightly less pro-right the next week. So why is that changed? To put a flag up to say you might want to look at this. So this is all to do with natural language processing. And it's also the ability to understand what the sentiment is about, because sentiment in a sentence can be very variable and you need to understand which part of the sentence are people talking about. So it's real deep use of NLP. In this example here, what we actually did is look at a corpus of tweets from a Republican Party, from the Democratic Party, and then from the citizens, and looked at the sentiment of those tweets and looked at which stories were being talked about by each 3 groups and looked at how they're related to each other, and did that as a real-time thing to see how through the election things were changing. What was the sentiment about one subject, who was, I'll use the term winning, but how was things changing? Another item we do, which is a derivation of sentiment, is fact extraction. Fact extraction is trying to identify specific facts within this open source intelligence. But that could be quite risky, so we quite often then apply forms of validation to that fact. So you might have trusted sources, you might have the fact that you want to receive a piece of information from 3 trusted sources before you declare that fact effectively a gold fact. An interesting derivation of that is, if you start seeing that a source is quite often predicting, as a minor source, what your major sources are saying, you could automatically tune the relevance of that major minor source for different types of incidents. So it's actually almost a self-learning technology there. So where does this get used? Well, effectively, cybersecurity, who's talking about what type of viruses, who's got solutions for it, what's the next attack going on? Counterterrorism, for example, Spanish users for which people are getting on planes and what do we know about that? So that's advanced passenger information. We get used a lot for political research. So what are people saying about a specific organization, or what are people public-wise or globally have an opinion about my country? And then it gets used for disaster type recovery and alerting on issues. So that's transportation logistics I mentioned earlier, breaking news so you can react faster. And as I mentioned previously, there's cyber threats. So artificial intelligence on unstructured data, on human data, allows masses of volumes to be filtered down to more relevant information that can be given to the human analyst. And with that, I'll hand you back.
Awesome, thank you so much. Our last emerging technology talk of the day is going to be from Russell Christopher. Russell is a Senior Director of Product Strategy. Russell, go ahead and take it away, please.
Hi, I'm Russell, and I'm excited to share a bit about what we have for you here at Alteryx. I want to start by relating my personal roadmap with Alteryx because it'll likely mirror yours. You can learn from my mistakes, or if you've already avoided them, you can judge me and feel awesome about yourself. So it's a win-win either way. So I'm a reasonably capable guy on a computer. Like you, when I got my hands on Alteryx, I was like, oh, I can make this good. I started connecting to data sources of all sorts. I started joining things and creating formulas, and I began to realize I was suffering from an acute case of Stockholm Syndrome, and that Excel VLOOKUPs were not necessarily my friends. Nope, those suckers were actually holding me prisoner, and I didn't even realize it. So my first lesson was that I had to alter my thinking and be open to new things and new approaches. After doing so, I found myself using Alteryx to prepare data and answer just about any question I could come up with, and doing it all without the pain I'd previously accepted as the price of admission. Now here's where I made my first mistake. I overlooked just how powerful, flexible, and complete Alteryx actually is. For example, I didn't use the fantastic starter kits that are out there to accelerate my work. Remember when you went to the circus and clowns started coming out of that little car, one after another? Well, yes, that's Alteryx, and I am equating a software platform with a trip to the circus. But tool after tool, output after output, process after process, there is so much value in that little package. Don't make the same mistake I did and stop exploring too early. Because right under my nose, I could have been readying my data for predictive analytics with Alteryx's machine learning-based data investigation tools, or maybe using codeless linear and logistic regression to predict future outcomes based on data I already had at my fingertips. I should have been performing market-based analysis on my goods and services, or maybe optimizing conversion rates with A/B testing capabilities. Finally, I should have been turning my best work into Alteryx macros and applications that I could share with my colleagues, because it's good to help others and it's nice to be a hero. I should have investigated the Alteryx Starter Kit gallery with solutions around marketing analytics, customer analytics, how to leverage AWS and Tableau, maybe diving into HR and financial services solutions, or how about healthcare and retail? It's mind-boggling, kind of like the clowns. The moral of this part of the story is don't just limit yourself to data prep and blend scenarios with Alteryx. Doing so is like getting a Swiss Army knife and only using the toothpick and bottle opener. So moving along, one thing I've learned over the years is that your data has a story to tell. The challenge is that sometimes that story gets locked behind doors or hidden in corners. Alteryx Intelligence Suite helps your data speak in a loud and clear voice, and if you haven't tried it, you really should. For example, image-to-text capabilities pull data out of PDFs and images. All those scanned documents of yours that have just been lying around, they become fair game in the world of Intelligence Suite. It's all just data now. Baked-in natural language processing puts the basic plot of your story front and center with a minimum of fuss on your part via topic modeling. So if you're not familiar with topic modeling, it's a technique which extracts themes and context from text. Alteryx also mines the opinions and emotion from text in a quick and easy way via sentiment analysis. Imagine scanning thousands of customer reviews and bucketing them by theme, maybe if the customer is angry or happy, so you can take action. With Alteryx, you can help your data speak for itself. Now, we know that many of you want to do more with advanced analytics or predictive modeling, but you either don't have the background or understand how to get started. I fell into that category myself. Assisted modeling is here to help. Without code, you can use the Assisted Modeling Wizard to create machine learning predictive models to get ahead of the game. Whether you're preparing your data, selecting models, doing model validation, assisted modeling teaches and guides you. Now, especially if you have no idea what I just talked about, assisted modeling is for you. I personally love learning, and it helped me grasp the basics of data science and go from 0 to 60 quickly. For example, I used assisted modeling to help me forecast which of my employees were at risk for leaving, which is actually all of them. Next, I'll use it to figure out what's wrong with me. And by the way, there are just times I want my answer and to move along. That's when you can run assisted modeling in automatic mode. It does its thing with your data, and you get to see the results on something called the leaderboard. It's automated data science for the impatient. So, now you've created all this great content, workflows, applications, predictive models. How do you share it with all of your colleagues in a secure, scalable, and easy-to-use manner? You do want to avoid Excel hell after all. I'd suggest you look at Alteryx Analytics Hub, our newest analytics server. You can start with as few as 5 users and then grow to thousands. Push your work directly from Designer into Hub and it becomes a valuable, reusable asset. Hub can also discover and keep track of all of the data assets in your company, so you don't have to worry about remembering obscure database and table names. It's just all in Hub. So, in summary, a couple of things. The Alteryx APA platform has amazing depth. Don't you dare just stop at prep and blend. Go further. Use those starter kits and explore all the tools on the tool palette to find useful resources which make you smarter. Your data has a story to tell, and Intelligence Suite helps that story to be told. And last but not least, it's never too early to start thinking about sharing. Use Analytics Hub to get there. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Russell. Up next, we will begin our last panel of the day, which I have the pleasure of moderating. So if all my panelists could please come on camera, now would be a great time. I'm going to go through and briefly introduce everyone. So when I say your name, if you could just wave, that'd be awesome. First up, we have Gil Alteryx. He is the Director of AI over at the VA. We also have Brian Lane, who's the Director of Artificial Intelligence at the United States General Services Administration. Next up, we have Jeff Hyacinth. He is the Data Science Lead of Analytics and Decision Support Division, also at GSA. And we have Adam Wood, key collaborator at Harvard. We also have Andy McIsaac, who is the Solutions Marketing Director in the public sector at Alteryx. And last but not least, we have Nick Sacchi, who we just heard from. He is the Principal Engineer of Pure Storage. So before we go ahead and kick off this panel, I just want to remind everyone that we do have a question and answer section. So I want to encourage the audience to submit questions of your own in the Q&A chat. We'll be shifting through them and answering them as we go. And also we'll have some designated time at the end to make sure that they all get answered. So with that, I would like to go around and I want each panelist to tell me a little bit more about themselves, the type of work that they're doing right now, and we'll begin that way. To kick us off, let me ask if Gil could go ahead, please.
Certainly, and thanks for the introduction there, Kristen. We'll just a little bit of background here. So I'm director of the over at the National Artificial Intelligence Institute over at the VA and with the Office of Research and Development. And we've been working on kind of setting up this institute over the last year or so. And there are a number of areas that we've been focusing on, a number of pilots, including in the COVID space, including other areas as well. We've been looking also at a number of different partnerships and collaborations, leveraging items such as AI tech sprints and other means of working with different organizations outside the VA. And then of course, interacting and collaborating with a number of the other agencies, including some of the ones that we've seen here and previously earlier in the talk. So with that, rather than going into specific projects, maybe I'll pass it on, and as the questions come, we'll go through more detail. Thanks, Chris.
Excellent, sounds good, thank you. Next up, I'd like to hear from Brian, please.
Hey, thanks so much, Kirsten. I'm really excited to be here today. Again, my name is Brian Lane, and I help stand up the AI Center of Excellence at GSA. While that's my day job, I also have a second hat that I wear supporting the DoD Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. I won't talk too much about that work today, but I think there are some pretty interesting things we've done there in relation to helping stand up the data management and governance processes for the Joint Common Foundation, as well as now I'm currently supporting their business process transformation mission initiative, which seeks to take on some pretty transformational initiatives in artificial intelligence, whether it's policy streamlining or automation of massive enterprise DoD systems and incorporating artificial intelligence where it makes sense to expedite some of those processes. Again, I'll follow along with Gil. I'm not gonna go too much into detail about specific projects, but I'm looking forward to sharing some thoughts and insight on where we think AI is going here in the future. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. Next, I would like to hear from Jeff. And Jeff, you are unmuted.
Sorry about that. Hi, Kristen. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Jeff Hyacinth. I am the data science lead for GSA's Office of the Chief Financial Officer. The Analytics and Decision Support Division, we are a brand new division stood up to support the enterprise analytics. Like the other panelists, I'm not going to go into project details. I've worked and collaborated with a lot of the folks at different agencies as well. But I think as an operational data scientist, have a lot of insight into some of the transformations that an agency or an organization will undertake, going from legacy operations to capitalizing on some of the emerging technologies, and how do you modernize your workforce in your operations.
Great, thank you so much, Jeff. Next, I would like to hear from Adam.
Hey guys, I'm Adam Wood. I'm a key collaborator at Harvard. Over the past year, as the pandemic has continued to place increasingly downward pressure on the US economy, the extent to which we've established continuity between the NI and the JAIC and others has been unprecedented. And so some of the work that we engage in very specifically has become a mission imperative for us, the fidelity to serve our people and protect national security, and the extent to which we're actively working together to reduce the density and duration of recessionary pressures focusing on a very robust and highly efficacious labor solution, leveraging AI and other emerging technologies. Again, to follow the rest of the panelists, we won't go too far in depth there, but that is just a little bit of what I do on a daily basis.
Thank you, Adam. I would next like to hear from Nick.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nick Saki. I'm the principal system engineer for Pure Storage's North American federal team. And I really function as a technology strategist, helping agencies map their path forward for the transformation of their infrastructure to meet both the demands of today's workloads as well as the next generation computing challenges. I've been with Pure now for nearly 6 years, and it's been rather breathtaking to see the acceleration and deployment of artificial intelligence operations, capabilities, literally everything across the federal government. My background is all principally out of the DoD and intelligence community, and obviously have more than passing familiarity with some of the efforts there. But also, of course, I cover the federal civilian agencies, so we have a tremendous amount of work that we do with Health and Human Services, the Department of Energy, and others who are really at the forefront of technology transformation. So very happy to be here today. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So to start this panel discussion off, I'm going to ask a question, and I would like to direct this first to Gil, and then others, if you want to jump in and answer anything that hasn't been said yet, we can go from there. So Gil, one of the first questions we have is, what does it mean to strengthen your agency's AI and data analytics? What does this look like to you?
Well, Kirsten, that's a great question. And I think when we think about data and analytics, really to strengthen it, there's a couple of ways of doing it, and we're really looking at both of those. So one is around a strategy, developing a strategy. There's been a strategy, a national strategy that's been developed and around national AI and R&D and a strategic plan. And there was actually recently a bill that passed as part of the NDAA that requires that to be updated, the national plan, every few years. At the same time, doing that at the agency level. So we're working through this task force around creating a strategy that takes and reflects the national strategy and then takes it and customizes it for the agency. And then at the same time, there's the idea of piloting. I think that's a really important area. I think about kind of what we call this, like the four sort of P's: piloting for processes, for policies, for partnerships, and when we do, and in processes, sorry. Pilots for processes, policies, and partnerships. So when we have those four P's, what we do is we learn about each one of those items, and then that can help us give feedback for the strategy as well. So it's kind of two pieces in terms of how we approach that.
Excellent, thank you. I'd also like to direct this question to Brian and Jeff, if you guys don't mind answering that. Maybe Brian first.
Hey, yeah, this is great. I'm so glad you threw this one at me, right? And I think what Gil described is kind of the top-down approach, right? We create the strategy, work our way through the agency, and then get to where we can have effects inside the organization, right? And as a COE director within GSA, we partner with federal agencies, and we also look at the challenge from a different perspective, which is bottom up, right? And so how do we start with the user? How do we start with use cases directly related to the mission and build up from there? And so a dear friend of mine once said, change management is a little bit like a spinal column, and you have to have champions at every level, otherwise the column tumbles. And that's really our approach when we talk about data and analytics and AI. Who are the champions at every level? What is the work that really needs to be done, and how can we smartly introduce artificial intelligence in a way that will stick when a pilot is over? And I think a lot of times that's driven by culture, and we want to build a coalition of people that support this kind of change and want to have a data-driven organization and an analytically focused organization for the benefit of the public.
Excellent, thank you. And Jeff, do you have anything to add on to that one?
Yes, sure. To echo off of what Brian was saying, operationally speaking, I also take I guess a bottom-up approach as well. I think, to strengthen your AI and your data analytics in an organization, if you're just starting from the ground up, I kind of frame it as two frames of thoughts: your pre-build critical thinking and your post-build or procurement critical thinking. So with regards to your pre-build, this is kind of really understanding how to frame your window of opportunity. So like, where are you in that crossroad, and being really honest with yourself and your organization about that state of maturity and capabilities. What are you finding? What's out there? And trying to really, scope your understanding or build that knowledge. And I think organizations like ATARC, some of our industry partners have done a great job at making that information available, and availing their resources and their subject matter experts to government to build that knowledge. And then the post-build critical thinking is really on like the project side, and like Brian said, the use case side. You'll notice that I'm not really going to focus too much on certain technologies and vendors, because I think the demand now is really in understanding what that last mile or that integration or that execution is, because the vendors are out there and access to them is increasing. So really understanding what your data environment or architecture is, and what is the collaborative and non-technical and technical resources that you need to bring together, whether it's a data scientist, whether it's someone from IT, all the way up to a SES or a senior executive in the agency as a sponsor. Like building that team is very critical in terms of really understanding the value of whatever your AI deployment is.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much for answering that one. I would actually like to shift the next question over to Andy. Andy, I apologize, I skipped over you for the overview. So please share with us a little bit about what you're working on. And then I would like to ask you if you could answer the question, where do you see the future of AI and data analytics going? And what emerging technology do you see helping us get there?
Sure. Thanks, Kirsten. First of all, Andy McIsaac, Solutions Marketing Director for the Public Sector here at Alteryx. Alteryx is a unified platform analytics company. We help users of all levels, of all technical acumen, really master and get their hands on machine learning, data science, and analytics by empowering them to solve their toughest data challenges. I think, as my colleague Russell Christopher indicated in his segment there, we really take the capability of applying advanced analytics and putting it in the hands of users, things like geospatial analytics, predictive modeling, machine learning, natural language processing, all in a no-code or low-code environment, and really focusing on being human-centered and keeping human-centered, keeping humans in the loop of analytics, machine learning, and data science. As far as what we think is, at least what I think is, the future holds is really we need to look at understanding the goals and the risks as we embrace analytics, machine learning, and AI. You need to be able to look at it and seriously develop answers around, what data is available, or what are you trying to do with that data? What's the data quality? What's the data bias? What's the bias contained in the workflows or in the models? And I think you really need to, as Russell indicated, your data has a story. How do you unleash that story most effectively? And while really keeping humans in the loop. And you need to be able to really incorporate human judgment and accountability into your analytics and machine learning and AI processes. Automation, we like to call it automation for human-based augmentation. What we're seeing is, at least in our space, clients are jumping all over the ability to unlock unstructured data in using things like Alteryx to tap into the insight of unstructured data like found in satellite imagery, and automating the teaching of the training of those systems to look at measuring things like construction starts, deforestation, or even flood risk. But I think most important is that whatever you do from an analytics perspective, a machine learning or AI perspective, is you have to maintain transparency. Any software platform or models really have to have that that transparency element into it. You have to understand what's happening in the model. What is it doing to your data? How is it interpreting your data? How it was built? You really have to focus on, what is the clear box approach versus a black box approach to really make sure that, that the AI methodology is explainable. So, you'll hear the term around explainable AI. And with things like assisted modeling, even if you don't have, you're not a fully trained data scientist who can write code, you still should be able to leverage things like machine learning and AI, but do it in a guided, assisted way and understand what you're actually doing to the process. So that whole idea of maintaining transparency within whatever process you're doing, I think is absolutely critical. And that's really going to, I think, be imperative for the future. And then it's been talked about a lot already. Data comes with a lot of, risks. So we need to find a way to mitigate, the undesired bias, right? We had to be able to promote, and one thing we need to talk about, and this really gets to the human element, and we can never forget how important the human element is in AIs. We need to be able to promote diversity, right? Promote different perspectives. Make sure that's built into the data and the models that we're building. And we really need to focus on upskilling our resources. I think Adam, I think in our pre-call around this, we talk about, we do have a gap. We're going to see a gap in the federal in the federal workforce. How do we leverage the resources that we have, the people who have that domain expertise, who may not be fully trained data scientists, but know what the answers that they're looking for, know what data they would like to leverage? How do we make sure we include them in this process and really focus on being human-centered as we apply things like machine learning and AI?
Definitely. Thank you. Adam, did you have anything that you would like to tack on to that response as far as where you see the future of AI and data going and what emerging technology will help us get there?
Yeah, and thank you for that segue. When I think about the applicability of data, AI, and other emerging technologies, I place a concerted effort on what it means to the people it's designed to serve. So before I think about that, though, I think about the state of play that those people are operating in. I think about the environment and the forces at play within that environment. So I tend to lean on looking at what exacerbates some of those circumstances. And so over the past year, one of our Friday working groups that includes, thought leaders from academia, industry, and the government has focused on a challenge that's been adversely affecting our national security and some of the ways that we can leverage AI despite the side constraints of COVID-19. And in the context of national security, I'm talking about the absence of a foundation in our federal workforce. Sandy Barsky just had a question a few moments ago, and I answered that. So I won't review the current state of play regarding the federal labor force, but there is a clear absence of AI, ML, and digital competency or a uniform technical language that's being spoken throughout our government. Notwithstanding a vacant standardization of codified requirements and training and the lack of a digital core competencies that's pervasive within the federal space that could probably be ascribed to a lack of efficacy that's been provided in previous education training, research and development initiatives to meet the mission of every department and agency within our government. So not to go too deeply into that line of effort, I think that it's important to understand that when we're talking about how we will leverage specific emerging technologies and AI and the data that goes into supporting senior leadership decisions, it is important to consider the fact that we do have to be human-centered with how we go about things. Federal workers, servicemen and women in the uniformed services, operators, and folks that have been displaced in our country since the outset of the pandemic. And I think that we're very close to achieving a solution that will solve for a myriad of challenges.
Excellent. Thank you for answering that. And then I want to direct a question over to Nick. Nick, in this period of time, building the new normal. What emerging technology do you think has led to the strengthening of federal AI and data analytics?
Well, I think, from the compute perspective, there's two, but they're both silicon related, and it is the rise of and the prevalence of GPUs and dedicated artificial intelligence processing chips for handling the types of workloads that AI impose on a compute infrastructure. And the second one is the transformation of enterprise storage systems from being disk-based to being flash-based. Because unless you actually have a completely parallel end-to-end architecture, you're going to bottleneck and break your systems, or at least really extend the amount of time that it takes to get to the answers answers to the questions you're asking. The amount of churn, the amount of times that data is iterated through and leveraged across, multiple tens of thousands of processes simultaneously requires a massive degree of parallelism. So if you have 10,000 GPUs leveraging the same sets of data, or worse, different sets of data across a distributed data set, then the storage platforms themselves have to be able to respond in microseconds to those queries, but it also has to be able to push, multiple terabytes per second of throughput. That's not something that was really technologically or economically feasible even 10 years ago. So as we watch, it's almost like watching the cars catch up to the racetrack and the drivers. And that's actually not a bad corollary in a lot of respects. We now have incredibly powerful engines on incredibly demanding racetracks with incredibly talented software, people driving the cars. The storage arrays are really what connected everybody to the road. So as advances have happened in what's really properly thought of as the data service layer as opposed to storage, we've seen a tremendous increase in the ability to drive AI at scale and to deploy it at scale as well. We can work with meaningful data sets in training and practice, and then we can deploy those against relatively similar sized data sets in production. And then because the technology enables so much more agility, you get faster and faster iteration in training the algorithms, faster and faster, I would say, inception of new AI and new algorithmic concepts. And then you can test them and deploy them against either existing data sets or even new data sets much more readily than you have in the past. So a lot of what we talked about and my other panelists have talked about is the upper levels of the stack of AI operations, of policy. But unless you actually have the ability to leverage the data and harness the capability, you get stuck trying to write on a chalkboard in a digital age. So thanks.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. So I think this is going to be a good time to pop up a poll question. Alyssa, if you don't mind sharing that with our attendees and panelists, you can answer it as well. I'll go ahead and read it while we wait. In your opinion, how has your agency done in embracing the new normal in the federal AI and data analytics space? So for those attending, you can answer great, or we're still working on it, we're working towards it, or we have not embraced it. So maybe we'll give it a couple seconds, and then Alyssa, whenever you feel that we are ready to see the results, we can go ahead and show them. Okay, interesting. All right, Brian, does this surprise you, or is this as to be expected right now?
No, this is not surprising to me. Just looking at the poll results, and understanding what other agencies are going through right now. I think you're kind of split into two camps. You've heard the hype about artificial intelligence and data analytics, and you want to understand how that applies to your organization, or you're kind of beginning or in the middle of your AI journey and trying to figure out really what that looks like inside your organization as an institutional practice. I think there's very few agencies that are not following artificial intelligence or investigating its use, and I think there's also very few that are on the other end of the spectrum saying we've fully adopted and are an AI enabled organization right now.
Excellent, thank you. Looks like we have a question come through, and this one is directed towards Jeff. Sandy Barsky asks, Jeff, how do you see the path to enhance the communication, coordination, and collaboration between the labs exploring AI solutions and the mission offices, which would choose to apply those solutions?
Well, thank you for the question, Sandy. On saying that, you know, they're great at AI, and that Zero said they're not. And I think the fact that agencies or organizations find themselves kind of split in those two tranches, as Brian suggested, has a lot to do with industry, academia, and government coming together in a very, I guess, transparent and maybe vulnerable way, in the sense of participating in labs and being clear on where they're at, what are some of their constraints, challenges. So the collaboration, the communication, and the coordination in engagements such as hackathons, challenges, and things like that, where government and these organizations are having an opportunity to have experiential learning and kind of kick the tires around some of these things and ask questions, and it not be done in the highly structured way of how government has historically procured technology. I think really helps with kind of building an awareness, building a knowledge base, helping folks roadmap strategies. And I think that's, you know, that ground level of discussion and collaboration and sharing of insight and availability of resources is really driving that. I've seen and I've participated in organizations who are now really willing to spend a good amount of money on hackathons and challenges, really just to discover what they don't know. And I think that's a great starting point with these labs. The other part of it that I see is a willingness for our industry partners to really engage in these labs in a non-proprietary way, where they're, you know, putting access to the technology even for a trial use. All of that helps build organizations' confidence in what they're about to procure and trying to stand up.
Excellent, thank you.
I hope that answers your question, Sandy.
So I have another question, and I'd like Gil to kick us off with this one. Could you comment on getting advanced analytics and AI out of pilots and into large-scale production better? How do agencies need to view collaboration, governance, and concepts like model ops or ML ops?
Certainly, and actually this kind of allows me also to clarify something I mentioned earlier, in that I think it's very useful to have the top-down and bottom-up approaches. So the top-down is leveraging kind of building the strategy and so forth, and the bottom-up being those pilots and so forth. Of course, you can do top-down pilots as well, but I meant it in terms of kind of doing kind of bottom-up pilots. And I think that kind of helps in this question as well, is that when you think about pilots, one of the challenges sometimes to get into scale is because if they do arise from kind of bottom-up use cases. In our case, we have a veteran engagement board where we get different use cases and so forth, just so we can think about what are pilots, and sometimes they're pilots that have emerged, you know, and we learn about them. And so in either case, you know, as you mentioned, getting it to scale is really an important area, and it's just a different type of skill, essentially. Many times it's a different type of team that's needed to take it to scale. And that's one of the nice things at the VA. There are a number of different types of teams and groups that do and specialize on different things. So there's a whole ecosystem that focuses on taking things from pilots and bringing them to scale. There's a whole set of guidances around that. There's different types of competitions and different types of things that do that. So what I would say on that is that it's not an necessarily AI specific thing, but rather just the notion of taking pilots to scale is something that occurs a lot in kind of this IT or health IT space. And we can leverage a lot of those groups to do that. And that's kind of the first step in that process.
Excellent, thank you. Andy, do you have anything that you would like to add to that question?
Actually, I wanted to go back to just what Jeff was talking about. Very important to do things like hackathons and really getting people to experience whatever the technology is, to use it, partnering up between the government agency and whoever the provider is. I think that's really critical. And I think that helps speed some of the development or getting models actually into operation when the intended users have a chance to experience whatever the platform is before the actual procurement. I think it gives them a level of comfort, and also I think really releases a lot of their inner creativity. We got some very creative people that work for the federal government, that work in state and local government. I think that they just need to be given an opportunity to experiment, leverage the data, utilize their domain expertise to really apply and really solve some real critical problems. So I think it's a combination of things, but I think what Jeff was talking about, the emergence of hackathons and trials and demos and things like that are absolutely critical at this place in time.
Excellent. While we are here, why don't we pop up our next poll question? Alyssa, could you please put that on the screen for us? And the poll question is going to be, when adapting to the new normal, how satisfied have you been with your agency's ability to do so? So please go ahead and answer whether you're extremely satisfied, satisfied, neither satisfied, dissatisfied, or extremely dissatisfied. And Alyssa, whenever you think we are ready to see the results. Okay, so at least there's not too many, there's no extremely dissatisfied people, so that's good. Adam, what are your thoughts on that? Does that make sense to you right now, or are you surprised by the answer?
I mean, I think that departments and agencies have a really good opportunity to modernize their workforce with the cognitive skills that are necessary to compete in this fourth industrial revolution. On a weekly basis, I deal with leaders across the U.S. military, the IC. Jim Liu just prompted a question about how academics can help here. So obviously in academia and industry, and we have weekly discussions with our allies as well. And one of the things, despite the fact that I answered I'm extremely satisfied, I am finding an increasing divergence in terms of digital acumen among the senior leadership from the government versus their counterparts relative to executive cadre of the private companies. And so, I think that keeping it on the positive side, though, I think that we are seeing an increasing, frequency of collaborative efforts among diverse elements of the U.S. government. And I think that that's a really important trend that should continue. And it's a positive one.
Awesome. Nick, what about you? Do you have anything to add to that one?
I was thinking actually of reviewing one of the questions about a shared AI and ML operations library. And I know that in my involvement with a couple of our customers, particularly within the Army, one of the key emphasis items that they embarked upon about 2 years ago was the creation of an AI and ML ops framework and a machine learning library. So algorithms that had been tested and validated against types of data sets to be effective, but then can either be reused or shared with other departments who have similar challenges to face. And I think that we're going to see, much like the creation of a tailored branch of the service for a new environment space, we're going to see the creation of an entire organizational framework for supporting AI. And we see the components of it in place already with the JAIC. It's a Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. So we're going to start seeing the creation of a service catalog of AI algorithms available for use across various different departments. Defense Healthcare and the Veterans Administration, Health and Human Services would doubtless benefit each other across a variety of different echelons, just as across the IC, there are applications there for everything from the Forest Service and firefighting to FEMA and disaster mitigation and recovery, finding people, finding vulnerability points in infrastructure, et cetera. And then, of course, for DHS's perspective and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, there's a tremendous amount of cross-pollination between what they're doing and what the IC has to do for offensive and defensive cyber operations. So it makes sense to start seeing shared capability banks, if you will, that promote much faster iteration and innovation and much better development of core capability to support the United States and protect its people and its interests. So I think that we're going to likely see that be a convergence point, particularly under the new administration. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Okay, next question is for Brian. What is the biggest obstacle in getting the buy-in needed to help with some of the goals set out in the most recent AI executive mandate?
Oh, that's a good one. Biggest challenge. All right, so, or obstacle. So here's what I'm going to say, and I've heard a number of people touch on this in the panel so far, related to people and culture and things like that. And I think there's two ways to attack this problem, right? The first one is you can spend the time and investment and make more data scientists and AI engineers, and that takes a lot of time. And it takes a lot of expertise, and it takes a lot of finding the right people that have interest in doing that kind of work. But then the other way to slice it, I think, is to make those tools and capabilities more accessible across the board. And I think that lines up pretty nicely with what we're seeing in emerging AI technologies. I think we're at a turning point in which commercial capabilities are being simplified, and they resonate with users. They're being pushed down to a level which you don't have to have a PhD in computer science in order to use artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think through that, there's a process of learning happening that oftentimes we focus on computer vision or object detection or topic modeling, or a very tiny part of a workflow that's an interesting AI problem, but is not a complete workflow. And what we really need to get after is if we're going to overcome this transformation to become AI-enabled organizations in the government, these tools need to fit into users' workflows. They need to make sense in what people are doing day to day. Even if we reimagine the processes a little bit, if your latest AI algorithm or deep learning architecture doesn't help someone do their job better, faster, or smarter, then what good is it, honestly? And when I look at intelligent automation processes, these are hybrid systems, right? You have a little bit of machine learning here and there. You have some automation. You have some human in the loop or human on the loop, but it's a hybrid system, and that's what data-driven organizations do. They dedicate time and engineering to create a hybrid system that meets the needs of their users. That's exactly what the government needs to do as well.
Excellent, thank you so much. Gil, I would like to turn it over to you and ask, what are the values of the solutions, use case, library, and the efforts to create it?
Yeah, certainly. And I think Andy had mentioned a couple things on some of the use cases, wanted to build on that. That I think one of the really interesting thing about use cases is that when you work and create those use cases, you learn about use cases that are similar, but maybe a little different. And then, so that way you can actually find if there's sort of a larger use case where both use cases can kind of be solved by this larger use case. Rather than solving a bunch of little problems, you can work together either to make sure that they solve a larger problem, or you can kind of tackle that larger problem in the first place, working with all the different stakeholders who might benefit from it. So basically, building that use case library is really useful because it allows you from the bottom up to build all the different, to get input from all the different stakeholders and then potentially, adjust your strategies accordingly, build your pilots accordingly, in a way that can satisfy all the different, stakeholders. And also, if it involves multiple agencies, then learn from the other agencies in that process.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Adam, I have a question just for you. Someone is asking us for a picture to be painted for percentages of data scientists to artists to sociologists, psychologists, and ologists. We will need to build this holistic force. Could you, in a minute or two, kind of give us a picture of that?
Yeah, okay. Congress came out last December, right? So 2019, and this was a mandate that was supported by the IC. And one of the things that was discussed was the extent to which we desperately need mathematicians, cybersecurity professionals, data scientists, and the like, as well as non-technical professionals that could become, as I said before, digitally competent, at least speak a common language. There was a recent paper, so I know that Sandy asked this question, and before I mention the paper, our Friday working group that we have specific for AI, we have been working on this for nearly a year to address all of these challenges and to bring people into the federal workforce due to the current lack of foundation that we do have. As I answered earlier, 6%, less than 6% of our current federal workforce is under the age of 30, and 1/3 of our federal workforce will be eligible for retirement in less than 4 years. So what that should signal to the entire government, this is not an isolated or exclusive to one department. What that should signal is a strong demand for all of those types of disciplines. There was recently a paper published by Georgetown's Emerging Security Technology Working Group, and they're currently assessing the entire U.S. Human capital AI structure for the labor pool. And what we are doing, one of the things that we're doing is we're focusing on America's federal workforce specifically and looking at that AI and ML talent and education value proposition to encourage and incentivize people that have not previously served in public service to provide them with an opportunity to do so. And that will require all disciplines, not just AI, ML, and emerging technology professionals.
Excellent, thank you. So we are getting towards the end of our panel discussion, and this time has just flown by. It's been so interesting, but I want to go around and I want to hear from every panelist. Just sort of as like a wrap up, what is one key takeaway or a piece of advice that you want to leave, all of our attendees when it comes to their journey with data analytics, particularly during this time of the pandemic? And why don't we just go ahead and start with Gil, and then we'll go around on my screen. It looks like this.
Yeah, so I would just say don't be afraid to try new things because especially in these days, they're kind of some of the standard processes, policies, and kind of partnerships and ways of working are kind of different. And so think about piloting processes, policies, and partnerships in new ways.
Excellent, thank you. And then Brian?
Yeah, my advice honestly is don't do this alone. Right? We're all learning together. We're all going down the journey together, whether it's learning new skills, whether it's bureaucracy hacking and trying to figure out how to get these initiatives to stick in your organization, how to find funding, how to, find the executive sponsors you need to drive these projects, how to show results. This is a team effort. And so, none of us are in this alone, and I think we're all inspired by the ultimate beneficiaries of our efforts, which is the American public.
Thank you. Jeff?
I would say don't be afraid to fail. I would say I would echo the sentiment of reaching out, joining a consortium, joining a working group, even if you're just joining to listen. I think acquiring that base knowledge helps kind of lessen that apprehension and that fear, as well as gives you the type of connections and access to resources to really bring other folks along within your organization. The change management is a real risk, and I think people can help you navigate that.
Thank you. And Andy?
Yeah, I just want to go back to what Brian said a little bit about, really working on one of the things to do to help build the culture. The technology is becoming more accessible, more democratized. My advice is, get your hands on the technology, do a trial, do a hackathon, build your skills. One of the things that we were really proud of here at Alteryx this year is we launched the ADAPT program to really help people who were maybe unemployed or impacted by the pandemic to build up their data and analytics skills through a set out curriculum. And one of the best stories, I'll ask you folks to Google it if you're interested. Google ADAPT program, U.S. Navy veteran. This young woman went through our program coming out of the Navy, and now she has desired skills in the data and analytics space. So it can be done. I think people just need to take advantage of the opportunities, and and it's up to the private sector to help build that workforce. And I know we're trying to do that here at Alteryx.
We'll have to include that link in our end of event wrap up. Nick, we'd like to hear from you next.
In the continued pursuit of artificial intelligence efforts and the development of AI programs and machine learning operations frameworks within the government, we want to encourage our viewers to take a look at both some of the use cases at purestorage.com, as well as reach out to your counterparts and ask them how they've been successful and how they haven't been. A lot of times this tribal knowledge is essential in sidestepping things that might have been problematic for another agency as they were getting going. There are a number of forums, this being one of them, and I really encourage you guys to stay tied into the government community, as well as, of course, to feel free to reach out to industry. One of my jobs is relating to our customers in the federal government what the successes and pitfalls have been for large-scale commercial and enterprise deployments outside of the government space. So we've seen quite a bit that has worked. We've seen good ideas that were implemented unevenly, and then we've seen things that simply didn't work at all. And we're happy to tell you why, so that you can learn from the wisdom of others. So I really appreciate having the opportunity to speak with this audience today, and to see some old friends whom I haven't seen in quite some time, Mr. Lane. We're always happy to discuss what we've seen, what we've learned, and to share that with you to help you be successful. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you. And Adam, leave us with a mic drop.
Yeah, I think that it's important, especially this day and age, to remember the extent to which patience is a dependent variable in this equation. And I'm speaking specifically to the process that you have to prepare yourself to embark on when you get into a working group, define the focus, become innovative, and you craft that idea. It takes a lot more than just an idea. And I think that working with academia, working with industry, working with government gives folks an opportunity to analyze the market and industries that are going to have to be stakeholders in your projects. When you identify partners that you could be married to for 5-10 years, when you're working through the concept and querying prospective stakeholders and partners, to getting to that point where you decide to build it, deploy it, and scale it. It's really important to remember how patient folks are going to have to be. But when you place people first and you put that the fiscal responsibility that we have to be acutely aware of, but you place people first in that decision engineering, you walk away with the ability to really succeed. And I think that would be my little drop there.
That was a great mic drop. Thank you guys so much. That is all the time we have. I want to thank our panelists for this great, insightful, and fun discussion. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you to all of our amazing panelists and our fabulous keynote, Justin Marsico. I would also like to thank our partners again. So thank you to our partners over at Snowflake, Enterprise DB, Denodo, Pure Storage, Micro Focus Government Solutions, and Alteryx. We always enjoy working with you all. To be a part of more of these discussions, please join our working group. I'm the working group manager here, and we have a few of our project team leads on this panel as well as the ones prior. So if you want to get involved and have this interaction on a daily basis, please reach out to me or reach out to ATARC and inquire about our working groups. And I'd love to have a one-on-one discussion with you to see where you can help contribute the most and where we can provide the most value to your agency or your organization. So before we close out today, I would like to share another event that we have on deck for this week. On Thursday, January 21st, from 1:30 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, ATARC will be hosting our weekly after lunch webinar series. And this week, we will be gathering federal IT data and cloud experts to discuss how they are strengthening their federal agencies' data capabilities. So join in to hear the recent challenges, successes, and lessons learned by our government IT thought leaders. And we hope to see you all there. So thanks, everyone. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day and a great rest of this short week. Bye.